Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I am your host, John DeLynn. I am here with my dear partner, Margie. Hey, Margie.
Hi there.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Today, we are going to be interviewing Tara Herbert. Hey, Tara. How you doing?
Good.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. For those who just kind of want the preview of some of the topics we're going to be talking about, Tara's story involves a lot of really important themes. Adoption, transracial adoption, growing up as a biracial or a woman of color in Utah, going to Utah schools. Tara has in her outline sexuality and sort of navigating sexuality as a teenager, mission, faith transition kind of stuff, marriage, childhood, and of course, navigating a faith crisis. Those are some of the topics in your outline.
Yeah.
Did I miss any big ones?
No, not that I can think of.
Okay. Yeah, well, we're super excited to have you.
Yeah,
and
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and sometimes we like to give people a chance to kind of state an intention of why they would come on Mormon Stories and why they want to tell their story. So maybe we can start there.
Yeah, I feel like my intentions are probably the biggest Mormon reason why is just to have a record of it for my sons. You know, I want them to know their mom, and they are always going to be Mormon adjacent. So I just want it to forever be a conversation that we have.
I love it. So like a witness, you want to leave a
journal,
testimony,
if you will.
A journal, a testimony, a witness.
Wait, that's so familiar.
That's very Mormon. All right. Okay, cool. Well, Tara Herbert, where does your Mormon story begin, or where does your life story begin?
Yeah, so I was born in Lake Charles, Louisiana. And when I was about 2 weeks old, I was adopted into my family, right? And for the, I guess, reasons for the story, my parents who raised me, I just call them my parents. And my parents who birthed me, I call just like my biological parents. So they placed me for adoption, and I was adopted into a Mormon family.
And what do you know about the background of also your parents, meaning your Mormon family? What do you know about your parents? Yeah,
my dad grew up in Rupert, Idaho, and his mom is a member. His dad was never a member. They eloped when the day she graduated high school, because my grandpa was never a member. They obviously knew that her parents would not want them to get married. And then my mom grew up in Fort Worth, Texas, and she comes from like pioneers, her family. So, yeah.
And normally I wouldn't ask this, but were your parents both white?
Yes.
Okay.
Both of them are white. Yeah.
Okay.
Caucasian.
Are white. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right. So they get married. So it sounds like your dad did not serve a mission.
He did serve a mission.
Oh.
So all of them, they raised their kids Mormon. My grandpa was never religious at all, but he would go to church with my grandma. He served in callings with my grandma.
Oh, wow.
He's probably had the missionary lessons more than anybody I ever knew. But he just never converted to Mormonism, never wanted to. So, yeah, but they were all raised Mormon. And so,
okay. So your dad did serve a mission.
He did in Argentina.
In Argentina.
Yeah.
And it sounds like he married your mom when she was young.
Yes. So they met at BYU. And yeah, they got married, I think the same time I got married. So my mom was 21 and my dad was 24, 23.
And temple marriage?
Yeah. Temple marriage.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did your parents have biological children?
Yes. So they have 4 biological children. Their oldest passed away right after birth due to complications. And then they had 2 kids, started adopting. My brother is from Korea. So they adopted him, and then they had another biological son, and then adopted 3 more kids, which would be me, my older sister and a younger brother. Not biologically, though, just...
Now, normally when I think about adoption, I think about parents that can't have children biologically, and so they adopt.
Yeah.
I haven't heard, maybe I have never had someone to talk to before that with parents that had both.
Yeah.
Have you talked to them about why they were wanting to adopt
Yeah.
when they were able to have biological kids?
Yeah. So my mom always had really hard pregnancies. So after their first child passing away, right after she was born, doctors told her not to have any more kids biologically, just because of how hard it was on her. Like, she almost died, lost a lot of blood after that, but she kept having kids. And then when she was younger, they used to do like foster babies. So like until the baby was like either going back home to their family or to be adopted, her mom took care of those babies. And so she felt like that always, since she was a young kid, she just wanted to adopt always. So
Okay. Was your mom a stay-at-home mom? Is your mom a stay-at-home mom?
So she did like daycare when I was younger, and then she worked from home as a seamstress. Yeah.
And did you mention your dad's profession?
I didn't. So he is an aerospace engineer. Yeah. I think you have to be one of those if you're Mormon and having all these kids. Yeah. And so he works on planes, like the steering for airplanes. He worked on the Challenger space launch, which I'm sure he doesn't have on his resume because it did not go well.
I remember that.
Yeah, I think the whole world remembers it, but he didn't have anything to do with it. Yeah, so he's worked for, like commercial airline companies, for the government, doing not just regular commercial airlines, but also like for military as well. Yeah.
So when you joined the family, how many siblings were in the home?
There was 5, because I'm the 6th, and then I have a younger brother.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're the 6th of 7.
Yeah.
And where was your family living when you joined them?
In South Jordan, Utah.
Okay. For those who don't know, that's near Salt Lake City, probably 15 to 20 minutes southwest.
Yeah, like in
right?
the suburbs, yeah.
Yeah, kind of in the suburbs, near the Jordan River Temple.
Yeah.
Right, Riverton.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So that's a very white area. Am I right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, all of our neighbors had horses, and I don't know if that makes somebody white to have horses.
I was going to say,
but
wait a minute, what's the connection?
I think only rich white people own horses, though, right? Because they cost so much to feed and house, right? You have to be wealthy.
I don't know about you, Mark. I never had horses growing up. Did you have horses? No, I'm just
Oh, no horses to speak of,
Yeah,
but also
okay.
not, I wouldn't say rich.
Yeah, did you grow up rich? That's
true.
That's the key indicator of if you were rich.
You had horses.
Yeah.
And I know you may have mentioned this. Did any of your older siblings, were they any of them people of color, or were they all your older siblings?
Yeah, so my oldest brother is Korean.
Okay.
Yeah, and then my sister is half black, white.
She's older?
Yes.
Okay. So you were the first person of color in your family of origin.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So what are your memories of your childhood growing up as a person of color in white South Jordan, Utah?
Yeah. Well,
With most of your family members being white, right?
yeah. I probably didn't realize, it was probably a while until I realized that I was even black, right? Because I had siblings that were black. Like it seemed normal to me to everyone in your family be different color, right? And my parents had a lot of friends that had adopted as well. And we went to Genesis.
Okay, tell people what that is.
Genesis is like Black Mormon Church in Utah. It's like once a month on Fast Sunday that you go in the evening to another 3-hour block
Wow.
of church.
Wait, in addition to your normal
Yeah.
ward?
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
And this is something it's a single ward, right?
Yeah.
In Salt Lake. And its history dates back to the 70s, even back to before Black Mormons were given the priesthood and temple blessings, right?
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it goes way back.
Yeah.
So it was just there were so few Black Mormons.
Yeah.
They wanted to be able to get together. So this Genesis ward was created to allow them to kind of fellowship.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. And majority, I would say, like, of the people who were there were white parents with their adopted Black children. But the people who were actually like the bishops and stuff were Black. But I would say like the members who were making up it were mostly the kids were Black, not the actual parents.
Now, it's interesting that your parents who are white were wanting to take you to Genesis. I could see Black parents wanting to attend or take their kids to Genesis. What made your white parents want to take you to Genesis?
Yeah.
Versus just have the normal South Jordan Mormon ward experience.
Yeah, I would say like out of like my parents really tried to educate themselves prior to adopting, right? So like my mom took classes on how to take care of Black hair because she knew that was a big deal, and she knew that it was a big deal that we have other Black friends, right, to be able to associate with. And so going to Genesis was where we met our friends, you know, to be able to have a community for ourselves.
So
of people.
important.
Yeah.
And really something, I mean, Utah, to have that insight.
Yeah.
We love that.
Yeah. And we knew like every Black person in Utah. Like we just knew every
12.
Yeah. We knew all of them. And like even to this day, like if you were to tell me somebody who is Black and in Utah, I can like figure out how I actually know them.
Darice Gray. Do you know him?
Oh, don't know him, but even when I see like the Black Menaces, right? When I saw like Rachel, I know that she's friends with a girl that I know who is friends with my friend Tanisha. So it's like I know these people because of just how many degrees away, and we all kind of know each other still.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, I'm curious. Did you enjoy Genesis, and how was it different from your regular ward?
Yeah, I feel like I enjoyed Genesis. One, there's always food afterwards, which
Brilliant.
was great. Yeah. And I really enjoyed seeing other Black kids. And it was more focused on, in Genesis, was like specifically just the Bible. Like it wasn't really like Mormonism. It was just Bible stories, right? So like you weren't following the church's outline for that month. It was just like your teacher teaching you a Bible story. So
Interesting.
yeah, I feel like I really enjoyed it. And there was like, they have girls camp that you would do through Genesis.
Really?
Yeah.
So great. So social, the more social aspect, not
Absolutely.
just the
Yeah.
meetings.
It was called Genesis Girls Camp or whatever?
Yeah, it would just be through Genesis. Like you could go to girls camp with them. I never did that, but they like would invite you to go. And I still like all through high school went with friends who I met through there, you know? And so it's like even at my school, I knew other Black people because of Genesis. So yeah.
Very, very fun. Okay, cool. So, how normal, as far as you know, was your Mormon upbringing at home? You know, in terms of like family meetings, scripture study, church attendance, the Mormon rules, word of wisdom, law of chastity, our movies, swearing, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So like ours was pretty normal. And I feel like I would meet people who were a little bit more extreme and meet people who are less extreme. But I would say like on Sundays, we weren't allowed to watch any TV that was not like, you know, like the Book of Mormon stories or like it had to be like a G-rated Disney Channel movie or something like that. We weren't allowed to play with friends on Sundays. We had family home evening every single week. We woke up at 6 a.m. to read scriptures before we went to school. We did all of the Mormon things. Like if we were on vacation, we were going to church. If we were there for over a Sunday, we weren't shopping on Sundays. Like my mom would bring food for us to have during the day if we were on vacation so that we weren't buying anything. So it was very Mormon, I think.
So I have a question then with your family culture, you being young now, like if you're thinking back to your younger years, how you experienced your family culture, how would you describe, was it pretty merged with Mormonism or were there ways that it was kind of different? If you were just to describe like your home life.
Yeah, I would say like it would be very hard to make a distinction between the two, right? Like our family was very close, and I think like a lot of people might argue because of like we were constantly doing family home evening together as a family, right? We were having family dinner. We were having family testimony meeting. Like, so I don't know, like it was hard to distinguish what was my family's rules versus what were the church's rules.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then just a quick follow-up, like you remembering yourself growing up, what do you remember about yourself? How would you describe yourself kind of in those earlier years? What you enjoyed? Were you introverted? Just anything you remember. Yeah,
I would say very extroverted and just wanting to laugh and have a good time, right? For example, when I got baptized, a lot of people will feel bad that they like now have to be so perfect after they got baptized. For me, it's like I remember getting my birthday, like getting scriptures and stuff and being like, this is a really bad gift. Like I want something better to play with.
Yeah.
Or the lame gift.
Yeah.
The lame. That's not lame. He gave you scriptures,
really? Or on my baptism day, after we were at our house and I got in a fight with my brother and my mom was like, you just got baptized, like you can't be doing this. And like I felt like in my head I was thinking like, I'm glad I hit him. Like, and
I stand by that.
Yeah, I felt like that was a good decision, and like, so be it. Like,
so that's the opposite of scrupulosity. We talk a lot about scrupulosity of people like having a hyper conscientiousness.
Yeah,
you it sounds like you had kind of this self-confidence of like, these external rules, if I don't buy into them, I'm not going to care about them. I'm going to do what I want to do.
Yes,
is that right?
I felt like my whole childhood was fighting that. Because I felt like that was bad. Because I was like, why do I just like love to hit him? Like, why do I just like
I get such pleasure?
Yeah, like, and that's like wrong, Like, there's obviously a right way to do it, but I'm like, but it feels so much better to not like do it this other way, and not like stifle yourself. But I don't know. I feel like as I got older, I kept trying to like fight that and be better and not be so reactionary,
Yeah. You talk in your outline about being asked about your adoption. Do you want to tell some of those stories?
Yeah. I feel like a lot of times as an adult now, it's not strange for me to get questions and answer it because I'm an adult. But as a child, it's really weird for somebody to ask you intimate questions about something that you don't quite really understand yet, And so sometimes it would be from adults, like asking, how do you feel about being adopted? Like, do you feel like, what were some of the questions? Like, do you feel like your parents love you like they love their own kids? And which was a weird question because it's like, what do you mean their own kids? Like, I am their own kid. So why are you asking if they love me the same as their biological kids, I guess? or even asking like, when did you know that you were adopted? And they would ask my parents in front of us. And a lot of times my mom would just like laugh, like kind of like acting like, I don't know, like her reaction was like, this person's an idiot, you know, like just laughing it off. But I didn't know how to always react, especially from kids my own age who really didn't understand it. And kids are kids, you know, and they are, I don't know, they're human. We're good and bad, all of us, you know. And so specifically, I feel like I had one friend, well, like a frenemy. My mom used to like babysit her. And when she was mad at me, she was like, it was like psychological warfare with like another kid.
How old are you at this point?
I was probably like 8 or 9 years old. And she had stuff going on with her family, right? So her father had divorced her mother for another woman, right? And so she had her own issues, but she would like say stuff like, oh, I can't. She's like, I don't know how you feel loved by somebody who's not your real mom, or I don't know how I would feel about not living with my actual parents.
Wow.
And just stuff like that to like try and hurt my feelings. And I just remember one day she was doing that to me, trying to make me feel bad. And I was like, well, where's your daddy?
Because, and you knew what you were saying, right?
Yeah, because he lived across town with his other family. And I feel like after that point, she wasn't so vocal about trying to make me feel bad about it, about being adopted.
Because I guess you couldn't pass as a non-adopted kid because you were a different color than your parents. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that would invite questions from kids and adults. Is that
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah. And people just, I don't know, even to the point where people were expecting to see like Black parents, like a little bit later on. Like I played basketball, you know, and I had a friend who gave me like a basket of, she's like, we all got this for you because like your parents have never been to a game. And I said, my parents have not missed a game. And they've been, but she didn't know they were white. And so stuff like that where people would just assume. And it's like, yeah, that's my dad. Like,
But I hear you saying though that like since you were a child, you've had to hold oftentimes a lot of complexity and hard things through people's questions around you being adopted. Is that kind of what you were?
Yeah. And there was no conversation, I guess, with my parents about how to react to what I would consider inappropriate questions, right? That were like making me uncomfortable. My parents love adoption. And so they, I think, for them, it was just like being advocates of how great adoption is, you know?
Yeah.
But I don't think they realize, like, for their kids, how uncomfortable it would be to constantly have your life and upbringing in question.
That's right.
I didn't ask you if your adoption was opened or closed.
Yeah. So I was adopted through LDS Family Services, and it was a closed adoption. I don't
Which
think
means you didn't know, maybe your parents didn't know your biological parents? Is that right?
So they met them when they came to pick me up at the hospital, but that was it. They didn't get to like have any conversations. I think up until I was 5 years old, my biological parents were allowed to write letters. Like I had a pair of earrings that were from like my biological parents. They had given me, I had a doll that they had given me, and a blanket. But
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you did have you had limited kind of connection, like you knew.
And I knew that was from them, but I didn't, like, after, I think it was 5 years, like, they weren't allowed to contact us.
Oh.
Yeah. And everything was through LDS social services. So it was like they're sending it, they don't even know where you live, right? They're sending it to LDS social services, and then they're passing it on.
But then
got it.
And you have it for 5 years, but then it's gone?
Yeah.
Okay, so your biological parents would not have known what state you were living in, the names of your parents,
Yeah.
your name, your last name.
I think they assumed we were in Utah because she, specifically my biological mom, went through LDS social services because she wanted a Christian family.
Got it. Okay. Okay. And do you just remember as a kid how you felt about being adopted, just in your own internal mind, forgetting everybody else?
Yeah, I would think I felt like I loved my family and I loved my upbringing. Like I was free, and I also was taught a lot about how lucky I was to be in a Mormon family, right? Like my life would have been horrible to not be raised in a Mormon family. And so I should be grateful to be in a Mormon family because, not all get so lucky to be raised Mormon.
It feels great to be better than everyone else, right?
Yeah.
Feels great.
Yeah.
Okay. So another layer of complexity is, obviously the Mormon Church has a really troubled history with race. The priesthood ban on black members and temple ban on black members prior to 1978. So growing up in white Utah, where I think a lot of people grew up having never met a black person up until graduating from high school.
Yeah. My dad knew one black person his whole life.
His whole life, right?
Wow.
Yeah. So do you want to talk about that as a kid and how you were treated and that sort of thing?
So I feel like growing up in South Jordan, I knew a lot of I feel like in our neighborhood, there was a lot of other families who had adopted. So there were other black kids in my neighborhood because, I don't know, just this one neighborhood, they had a lot of kids who were adopted. So I still had friends that were black and I played basketball. So I feel like I met a lot of other, that sounds weird, but I feel like there's a lot of kids that were of different races playing basketball, I think the complexity came as I got older and was aware that I was a different skin color, right? Probably it was sixth grade when I really came into recognition that I am different. And it was it's almost like being raised white and being able to have all of that privilege, and then it only goes so far. You're reminded constantly hey, it only gets you this far because you're still black,
So there's this point when you're in sixth grade where you realize that you're different in a way that's going to be disadvantageous for you? Is that right?
Yeah. Just in the way that my hair, right, is when I think by that point, my mom had been doing my hair and she would just do I don't know, I thought it was nice, just braided back, or rubber band back in protective styles. And it was by sixth grade, people want long hair and you start curling your hair. And kids, there's one kid in particular who would call my hair a rat's nest, so it's realizing those differences of oh, your hair's not as good as their hair.
Yeah.
And maybe you're not as attractive. I don't know, as you're developing your sense of self. I don't know. There'd be times where I'd look in the mirror and I was well, I don't think I'm ugly. But I don't know if I'm good looking either because I have black skin, dark skin. So,
and that's you comparing yourself to others versus picking up signals for how, quote, attracted people are to you.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Is it both or just self-assessment comparing yourself to others?
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of both, right? I did have friends, for example, I had a friend who was Muslim and I was obsessed with him. His whole family had moved here, and like all of them were like literally like Muslim gods or God. They were so attractive. I don't know how they like were so good looking, but like I had a friend like that, right? So that he was brown, and so, but he liked white girls, you know? And so it was like, oh, okay, well, I'm brown, and the only other brown person that I know is attracted to white girls. And then as I don't know, getting into like middle school age where you actually are starting to like people, I feel like I never, like my friends started getting boyfriends or different things, and I didn't have boyfriends or people who were necessarily interested in me for my looks. So I don't know. For me, I felt like I had to be funny and like friends with people in order to have those like closer connections with people.
Yeah. Yeah, this reminds me of sort of the white supremacy beauty kind of standards, right? That you read about, and even reading about diet culture or where it comes from. A lot of it, as we trace so many things attributed to beauty and culture, the root we oftentimes end back at is sort of white supremacy kind of, right? And that hierarchy that kind of comes out there. And it sounds like at some point, it sounds like sixth grade, that you were hit. You came into this level of consciousness, awareness of like, there it is right there.
Yeah. That like, this is obviously better, or like perceived to be better by other people, you know?
Got it.
Yeah.
So you mentioned in your outline getting extensions for your hair. Talk about, for a white person that would have no idea what the universe is of hair, you know,
and
in that
to
context.
your mom's care and learning about hair, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned that.
Yeah. So I feel like my mom, like I said, she used to brush out our hair, right? Extremely curly hair, and style it. So when I was going into middle school is when I wanted like straight hair. And so getting extensions, even now, right? I have extensions. Basically what they do is my hair's braided back, and all the way up until here is not my hair. It's just extensions, right? And then my natural hair just lays over it so I can have long hair. And now I feel like I go back and forth between like braids, extensions, but like that was really big for me, like all through middle school, high school. For a long time, probably not even until I was married, I had never done braids or had my natural hair like showing at all. I always did extensions because to blend in, gotta blend in.
And is it fair to say that helps you look more white, like have white looking hair?
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah, and I think my features for a black person are very white, I would say, right? Like they're not like the African features. Like I have a small nose, like my eyes are, I don't even know what my eyes are, Asian looking, I don't know, but very like, besides from my skin tone, right? People would be like, what race are you? Like, especially when I have straight hair. Yeah.
Okay. So you got extensions to be able to fit in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what else was middle school and maybe early high school like?
Yeah. I feel like I had really good friends and lots of friends. Like I played basketball, and so that helped to get friends who like understood where you're coming from. Like especially my one close friend, she'd always be like, when we are in high school, all the boys are gonna want us, is what she would tell us all the time. She's like,
I love the confidence.
yeah. She's like, just give it time, like they're all gonna want us. And so I just had good friends that helped me to stay confident and not worry about it. And I was still like, I feel like I still probably had confidence because I was still getting like some guys, you know? So I felt like, hey, like I must be somewhat attractive because this guy I think is pretty attractive, and we made out. So
Okay, so you mentioned making out. There's a that theme is pretty important in your outline.
Yeah.
And I made sure to check in with you that this is something you wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk about boys and dating and I guess you listed sexuality as an important theme.
Yeah.
So since you mentioned making out, maybe we can jump into that if you want.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So once I got into 9th grade, I made the high school basketball team, right? So I would spend part of my day over at the high school, because in Utah, 9th grade is still in middle school. And that's when it just opened me to a whole new world of, I don't know, just boys and parties and just still Mormons, right? Because a lot of people are still Mormon, but just this world that I felt like was welcoming, I guess, because I felt like I had really good Mormon friends, right? That were not, I got the vibes that they weren't attracted to me. I even had some boys say that they weren't attracted to Black girls. And that's what it really, that's the vibes I always got from really Mormon people, was just that like my somehow being Black made me less attractive, or less desirable. And so when I got into high school, especially at like Bingham High School, there's just like, when you are an athlete, you start getting invited to different parties, and like, especially in basketball, right? Like there is a stereotype of like female basketball players being lesbian, which was very true, right? There was a lot of lesbians that I met and were friends with, and that was just something that was okay to talk about to some degree. And then it wasn't okay for them, though, to outwardly show that they were lesbian.
Especially as Mormons, right?
Yeah. Especially.
So kind of privately out? But
Yeah,
not
I think to like our team out, and maybe not even to themselves really. Like I feel like a lot of times they would like pretend that like maybe they weren't. But it was definitely as soon as a senior would graduate, right, they would be coming back to like see us and they'd be with like their girlfriend, right? So like it definitely was normal. But then they would still get in trouble, right? I had one friend who got caught kissing a girl in a hallway and got in trouble with our our coach, they got in trouble. So just, I don't know. It's just like a weird world to navigate, because it's like everybody knows that like there's lesbians, but like it's like also the added Mormon on top of it means it's not okay to like show that. But yeah.
And then that's all that world is associated with being a woman basketball player.
Yes.
But that's not you.
Yeah. I mean, when I was in high school, though, I was really terrified that I was lesbian, because I was like, if I'm Black and a lesbian, wow, like I'm not going to have a lot going for me. And so I really was worried about that. And I started going to parties with friends. Like that was just like our MO, right, was trying to find every weekend another party to go to. And I enjoyed going because I would meet people from different schools who seemed attracted to me, right? And that's like where I would meet a boyfriend, right? That somebody that would become my boyfriend was going to a different school and seemed attracted to me. So I enjoyed going to parties. And even though I knew it was not okay, but I felt more accepted and okay there than to hang out all the time with really Mormon people.
So this is going to sound really dumb, but growing up in Texas as a Mormon, I would attend parties and just feel totally out of place. People are drinking, smoking, doing drugs, having sex. And I would just be like, the world is terrible. But at least in Utah, the kids are righteous. You know what I mean? So in my mind, the types of parties we had in Texas would have never happened in South Jordan.
Yeah.
What are high school parties like in South Jordan, a very Mormon part of Utah? Are they just like everywhere else, or?
Yeah, I would say.
I mean, in terms of drugs, alcohol, sex, etc.
Yeah, so still drugs, alcohol, and sex.
Wait, what? With the Mormons or the non-Mormons, or both?
With Mormons and non-Mormons. And typically, like, the wealthiest people would be, like, their parents would be, like, the stake president or something. If you were going to their house to party, they may not be there and not be aware of it. But, like, I had
You mean the parents?
Yeah, the parents.
But the kids of stake presidents would still have parties with drinking, drugs, and sex.
Yeah,
Okay.
while their parents were out of town or something. I had friends who their dad was a stake president and their mom was an alcoholic, right? Like,
Or you mentioned prescription drug abusers.
yeah, so mostly prescription drugs is what, like, when I'd go to a party, right, there would be like a bowl of prescription drugs.
Which ones?
Wow.
I don't even know
Like
what they were.
Adderall or
I have
Ritalin? Or
literally no idea.
okay.
Ecstasy, I did try once. But there was one kid who we would go to his house, and his parents, like, it's very normal for parents to have tons of kids, and then they are retired, and his parents were on a mission, and he was on house arrest.
So like mission president and wife.
No, they were not mission president wife, just on a mission. Like,
But
they
leaving their high school kid?
Yeah, high school junior
Weird.
to graduate. Yeah.
What does house arrest mean?
Like, he had an ankle monitor and could not
Like literal.
leave his house. Yeah.
Why?
Because of drugs.
Okay.
And he was still having
Interesting.
parties at his house. And their house was huge and just, like, unreal. And yeah, his parents had left to go on a mission and left him to graduate high school. His older siblings would come and check on him every now and then, but literally just, like, at that point, I don't know if they just thought he was old enough to, like, raise himself or what was going on, but, like, they left, like, to go. That was more important, I guess.
Okay, so a lot of Mormon youth were partying,
Yeah.
just like everybody else.
Yeah, a lot.
And it was a place that you felt alive in, or
Yeah.
how would you describe how you felt in those?
In that environment.
Yeah. places?
Yeah, I would say, like, very alive, very excited. And it was so, like, I loved seeing the different wealth, right? Like, there's a neighborhood up in, I think, Sandy called Pepperwoods. And that's where, like, the richest of the rich Mormon live. Like, Mormons who are building, like, castles for houses. Like, it doesn't even seem real that these houses are even, like, that anybody could even afford these houses. And their parents really left them kind of unattended because they were so busy with work and so busy in their church callings. And so it was just kind of like, yeah, we could go because their parents were going to be gone all Saturday evening at the temple. Like, and so we could have a party there at their house.
And so you were raised by faithful Mormon parents, and you were taught not to drink, do drugs or alcohol or have sex or any of that stuff. So how did you navigate your own decisions given your faithful Mormon context?
Yeah, a lot of guilt. And then my friends and I would go to Catholic confessional.
Okay, wait, guilt. So there's that moment where you're like, here, try drinking or try this, or like a guy's coming on to you or whatever.
Yeah.
What's going on in your mind knowing that you want to be a faithful, obedient Mormon and you've been taught, quote, better?
I'm thinking, oh my gosh, like, I know I shouldn't be doing this, but everything's betraying me because I'm so curious. I just want, like, desperately to know how all this works. And when it came to guys, like, I feel like I don't even remember really the one conversation my parents had around sex with me. It wasn't even my parents, it was just my mom. And it was so confusing. Even when I think back to it, I'm like, I was literally like 9 years old.
And that was the one?
That was the one time, yeah. So literally just no context around sex outside of like the For Strength of Youth, how it all worked. Even our sex education at school was so just like convoluted and like for a child, you can't leave any guessing or like imply things because I didn't get it.
So
Right.
it's super vague.
Yes, very vague, and only like a day going over in like 7th grade and 10th grade is when you would have like one day in health class to go over how all of this works. And there's no questions. Like we weren't allowed to like have a question box to like ask these questions. Like it wasn't until I was in like a junior when I realized you couldn't get pregnant from blowjobs. Like because nobody explained that, like, how the sperm gets to the egg. Like, it was just so confusing. And so a lot of it, I think, was just like this desperate curiosity to figure out how it all works, because nobody was telling me how it worked.
Yeah.
So you would just experiment.
Yeah. And I knew I didn't want to get pregnant. So the one thing I did know was like nothing can like go in your vaginal canal, like, but like, yeah, we didn't know until later on in high school, like, hey, you don't need to take a plan B if you've like given someone a blowjob because the sperm's not going through your stomach acid. Like, so yeah, it was just very. And I think a lot of it, too, was like I felt confident when I could be like, this guy wants me. So, like, why is everyone acting like I'm not attractive, you know?
Yes.
So it was a way to feel desired.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And a way to fit in and have fun. Was it fun to kind of go to those parties and
or
have
did
fun?
the guilt?
I felt like it was a lot of fun because I had such a tight-knit group of like friends that we were like doing this with, where it was like some of them were Mormon, some of them were not Mormon. When I say some, 2 were not Mormon. The other 4 of us were Mormon, you know? And so we had, I don't know, it was just like, I don't know, like figuring out yourself as like a woman, a girl, and with your friends who are there to support you and make sure that you're relatively safe. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think we were also too young to realize kind of any of the dangers of it.
Yeah.
And there was nobody talking about, like, you know, I feel like our sex education or just education around alcohol is like, you know, in Mean Girls when he's like, if you have if you have sex or drink, you will die. Like that is how it felt.
All the bad things will come for you.
Yeah.
Basically anything bad you can imagine. Yeah.
So I had another group of friends who were very Mormon and who were like, I don't know why anybody would even want to drink. And I'm just like, wow, like you guys. And they were like the group that like in high school is still doing like night games, which is normal in Mormonism to be very like childish almost, you know? But I was like, okay, are these like night games going to turn into something like fun? Because
I'm just
like
saying.
I didn't come here
Is there
to
a
like,
next level
play
night
tag.
games?
Yeah. Yeah. So it was just like a little bit more immature where it's like I had my other group of friends where it's like, are there going to be boys there? Like they're on the phone with these group of boys like, okay, like I have a friend who's black and one that's Mexican. Do you have a boy for my girl? Like making sure that like we all were like equally gonna get some like that night. And I think in Mormonism, women are not allowed any type of sexuality, right? It's always assumed that like the boys are just like these feral, horny, like creatures that just can't get enough. But there was also like me and my friends, we were also horny teenagers, right?
Hormones.
Yeah.
There's enough to go around, as it turns out. Yeah.
When it was with us, it's like we didn't have to pretend that we were these delicate flowers that just like couldn't be crumpled, it was like, crumple me, buddy, because I am ready to go too. You know,
Yeah.
like it was like we all existed, or all of our sexualities existed, and it wasn't something weird, you know?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it sounds very normal and healthy, you know, if you look at, developmentally,
Yeah.
if you look across the country or just humanity.
Yeah.
Then within Mormonism, there's kind of the really orthodox Mormon group that's really conservative and I think stunted and childish.
Yeah.
But, quote, kept safe.
Yeah.
And that's a problematic statement too. And then there's just kids letting loose and having fun. And you were the latter. So how much guilt and shame did you feel trying to navigate the fun party friends and like your parents and your church experience on Sunday
church
where
on
you have to take
Sunday.
sacrament and confess to the bishop or lie to the bishop? How'd you navigate
Or as the
that?
case may be, a Catholic priest.
I think that I did feel a lot of guilt, and it was really hard. Like, if my parents ever watch this, they will be like absolutely floored, I think, because even to this day, my mom was like, you were the easiest teenager I've ever had. And it's just because I did what I was supposed to do. When it came to church, I always made sure I was awake to go to church, that I was, when I was the little My Maids president, that I did everything I was supposed to do, you know, didn't complain. And it was like a double life, right?
Yes.
Of
And your
like,
parents had no idea you were partying? Wow.
I would be shocked if they knew
Oh.
because, and I came home on time. That was a big thing for all of us, is like, you cannot miss curfew because that's going to like show that like something's up, you know?
Yeah.
So just making sure that like all of those, dotting your T's, crossing your I's to make
Which
sure.
doing that, like following the rules, doing all those things almost protected the exploratory part of yourself. It's like, well, if I show up, but it really is in many ways, like you said, like a split life, a split self emerges.
Yeah. And I still read my scriptures every single night. I still went to seminary, right? I still bore my testimony. I still did all those things. And I will say the ward that I grew up in was a lot of bad boys. And not like bad, but I would say like we all kind of had to look out for each other because we were all seeing each other at these parties. Mm-hmm. And so
You were all split livin'.
yeah.
So what about your prayers to Heavenly Father? Are you saying, oh my gosh, I did it again, I'm so sorry? Or, you know, how's that shame kind of forgiveness thing going
Like, what does it look
as
like?
you're a teen? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely every weekend I said I was going to stop. And so I would be like, this is the last hurrah, guys. Let's go out. Like, let's do this one last time because starting next week, I'm going to be a good Mormon.
I'm going to reform.
Yeah, exactly.
myself.
And so you just get like shit-faced every single weekend because you keep saying, this is the weekend I'm going to stop. This is the weekend I'm going to stop. And then, you know, 2 years later, you're still going and like not wanting to stop. I don't know.
Yeah.
And was that weighing heavily on you, or did you just kind of compartmentalize and not let it really get you down?
It was definitely weighing heavily, especially when it came towards like starting to do things with boys. I felt like obviously it was bad. Like the For Strength of Youth obviously talks about it as being bad to like not just make out, but to like touch each other, do any, you can't even touch yourself. So like imagine if you're letting somebody else do that. I felt very guilty. And so, yeah, we would go to the Catholic, we'd confessional and confess.
So you wouldn't confess to your Mormon bishop?
No, I never felt like I hated bishops' interviews. My dad was always in the bishopric all my whole growing up.
Oh.
And they were always like my friends, even like to the point where in high school, my bishop was my brother's father-in-law. So I just, like, as much as I, like, felt guilty, I just could not, like, bring myself to go to the bishop.
What was it like confessing to a Catholic priest?
It felt a lot better because, one, you're in a box, they can't see you.
Yes.
And since I'm not a part of their congregation, they don't know me.
Yeah.
It wasn't until before I went on my mission that I realized that Mormons were very big on authority. And so technically my confessions did not count. I did not realize that that was like a big...
That small technicality there.
Like, that was the whole reason why people were Mormon, was because it had the authority.
And so what would the Catholic priest say when you confessed?
So you go in, I'm trying to remember, because you're supposed to say, like, forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. And then they ask you, what was your sin? And you tell them what it was. And they would say that, like, technically that if you're doing anything sexual outside of wedlock in Catholicism, that's bad too, right? And so they would tell you to not do that. You're forgiven, and go, like, pray to Mary. So
Did you ever pray to Mary?
you can, like, go up, like, I don't know, there's, like, shrines in the Catholic Church, right, of, like, different saints. And yeah, I would just, like, go and touch Mary.
I love the individuality and the like, when we're talking about high control environments where there's so much at stake, these little pieces of you that you're talking about where you're thinking for yourself and you're noticing what you feel and on some level listening to that and trying that out, like, that's really, really something. Like, I honor that as part of your story, really.
Yeah, and I think, like, for me in high school, even though I felt bad, I don't think I had an understanding really how deeply, like, I think there is, like, a genetic factor to it. Like, I think, like, when you've been, like, bred Mormon and it's, like, in your DNA, that it's easier for you to, like, continue the status quo. Whereas for me, it was like, I don't know, like, when you're learning about, like, Mormon history or, like, pioneers, for me, it just was like, it didn't affect me because I was like, well, this isn't my history. Like, I'm not from pioneer stock, you know?
That's such an interesting point, because what I hear you saying is the differentiation already existed.
Yeah.
There was, like, a separation. Because are you saying kind of on some level, it's like, well, that's not my history. That's not my people.
Yes, exactly. And even, like, I don't know, like, I feel like my parents were almost, like, they celebrated that we were not, like, not from, like, that we were different, right? Like, and they understood that, like, and they would, like, laugh, like, oh, like, yeah, that's just, like, Tara, like, she's so sassy or she's so feisty. They're, like, definitely celebrated that aspect of it. And I think if they were to know what I was actually doing, that they would be very, very disappointed.
So the Mormon Church obviously has really strong feelings about gender roles, what the man is supposed to do, what the woman is supposed to do, ideas around professions and education for women. How did you see, what were you interested in? What did you envision for yourself in terms of family roles, but also career? How were you thinking about all of that in high school as you're, coming towards graduation?
Yeah. So I feel like for as long as I can remember, I loved babies, right? And so when I was younger, I would tell my family that I'm going to have 12 kids, which is, like, I feel like also encouraged, right? Like, I really loved my older siblings. My sister's about 13 years older than me. So by the time I was in 6th grade, she had already had her first child. And so I was always babysitting for my siblings and just loved kids. So I assumed, right, like everyone else, that I would just be a mom. And I would worry that I wouldn't be able to be a mom because of how much we talked about like the second coming. Like I really didn't think that I would get the chance to, because I thought that by the time I graduated high school, like I feel like that is what kind of pushed me to like try to go to parties and different stuff, because I really thought that I might not live until graduation. Yeah.
So in your mind, it was that imminent.
Yeah. Like I thought it was any day now that we would like, I don't know, like just be taken up, like, and not be able, I don't know, like there was just so much talk around like how horrible the world was. And like, for me, it was devastating because I just was like, I just want to live. Like, it's so fun. Like, and then Obama became president and that was like, oh, the world's over. Like, so it just felt like what I was hearing from adults was that the world was so wicked. Like, it may be any day now that we...
And Obama was indicative of that? I'm trying to make that connection.
I know. I don't know.
Oh, but that was your experience? Your experience was that Obama being elected played into it being...
Yeah. That, like, he was, like, just a really bad person. Like, it should have been, like, Mitt Romney was the one that was supposed to, like, bring the world to, like, righteousness.
Can I ask about this?
Yeah.
So I'm fascinated. So, yeah, one thing, like putting politics and partisanship aside, I always just genuinely liked Barack and Michelle Obama. Just as people, I just always sensed them to be decent, kind, thoughtful, smart people.
Yeah.
Now, I know there's going to be listeners that really disagree with me on that, and that's not important.
Yeah.
What's important to me is I'm wondering how you saw them growing up in Utah, knowing that in Utah, friends and family of mine literally felt like Barack Obama was the devil. They would say, he's evil, he's the devil. And so I'm wondering how, if you experienced that sort of rhetoric around the Obamas, and then if you did, how you thought about that with your own skin color and background, and knowing that there were similarities between your skin color and background and theirs, if that was something you even processed.
And racism in Utah.
Yeah. So first of all, I feel like I was taught that like racism was over, right? And that even like women's rights, right? Like the feminist movement like was over, right? That like this wasn't an issue anymore.
It's like, whew, glad we got through that, huh?
Yeah. And so it was hard to go to school sometimes and be called the N-word and have things that felt racially charged and not recognize that that was racism, right? Because in my head, racism's over. I was adopted by a white family. See, it's great. So when Obama was in office, my mom cried when he got elected.
Really? Wow, yeah.
Because
it was supposed to be Mitt Romney, right? Like he was the one that was supposed to like make the world a better place, and not get rid of the middle class or like make things super expensive, whatever, you know? So I don't know, like when it came to Obama being elected, like, it was hard for me to reconcile, like, being so proud that, like, a Black person could be president, and also seeing, like, what was so wrong about him besides that he's a Democrat, right? And so I don't know. Like, I don't know. I wouldn't say that, like, I don't think my parents are racist for not liking Obama, or do I think other people are racist for not liking Obama? No. But I do think there's just like some sort of bias, and maybe it was just because they wanted Mitt Romney so bad, and wanted a Mormon president.
Julia is messaging me that she was taught that Obama was the Antichrist. I think there's more to it than just wishing the Mormon Romney had been elected.
Yeah, me too.
I think there's
like
just
the second coming. I feel like for me that was like supposed to be indicative of like the second coming,
like the evilness of the end times.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Like things are so evil. Barack Obama's president, and Jesus is going to have to come save us any moment.
Exactly.
Is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
Did that feel like very heavy to hold? Like, do you remember at that time trying to like?
Or did it make perfect sense?
Yeah, like how did
of course.
how did that land with you at that time? Was it confusing? Were you dissonant, having like a lot of cognitive dissonance? Like, do you remember how it felt hearing all that and experiencing that?
Yeah, I think I felt overwhelmed because, again, I just wanted to live. Like, I think Mormonism in general felt very heavy at that time for me because I was playing these two roles, right? Of like having to live up to this expectation of being Mormon and following all these rules, but also seeing how much fun there was in life that I didn't want to miss out on. Like, I just did not want to miss out on, like, I feel like in the early 2000s, like, YOLO was a huge thing. Mm-hmm. And, like, my parents would always be like, no, you don't only live once, so don't mess this up. And it's like, I just wanted to live. Like, I just wanted to enjoy life. I just wanted to laugh and not worry. And so it did feel heavy to think that I might not make it to graduation, not because I like wanted to die, like, but because like the world was just so evil and I was contributing to that evil by not following all of the Mormon rules.
Yeah, that's heavy.
Yeah. So it was heavy. That's why I read my scriptures like all the time, because I was like, well, this has to make up for it. Or going and doing baptisms, I'd be like, this will make up for it.
Baptisms for the dead.
Yeah.
In the temple.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So in your mind, the Obamas were evil? Did you just agree with that?
No, I didn't agree with it. I just thought that for whatever reason, like, they didn't have the best interests at heart, right? Okay. And I was also still so young, right? Yeah. Like, that was my first time ever voting was for Obama, right? Right. So I was just too young to even understand
and
politics.
Still in a very high control, highly conditioned, environment.
Yeah, too. And my parents thought I voted for Mitt Romney, but sorry.
That's another thing they're hearing for the first time today. Who you really voted for.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I feel like I was also so naive, right? Because my main voting for him was because he was Black. Yeah. I didn't know any of his talking points or anything. I was just like, yes, like a Black president. Like,
got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Okay. So in terms of gender roles and profession, what were your thoughts in high school?
Yeah. So I didn't really have anybody outside that wasn't a stay-at-home mom or working like part-time, to like, the main job was always being a stay-at-home mom, right? And so when I was younger, though, we always had paper routes that we were doing, magazine routes that we were doing. My uncle had a magazine company, and so we'd distribute them. all across the Salt Lake Valley. And then I also worked for Brick Oven when it was built in South Jordan. And I did I was a ref for the rec center. I enjoyed working because my parents weren't the type of parents that just gave us money, right? Like we always had jobs and that's how we earned our money. But it was very much like nobody was ever talking to me about what career you want to do because it was assumed that I would be a stay-at-home mom. And I wanted to be at the time. You know how like, I feel like this was when like John By the Way was just getting big. All of these like Mormon public speakers that specifically only like came to speak to like youth groups and different things. EFY, yeah. Or even like for us, it was like an early morning seminary thing. John By the Way came, and he also came to like a fireside, which is just like a Sunday evening. And so I love that. Like I loved just like, I don't know, like I thought I wanted to do that. I wanted to be a fireside speaker, Mormon speaker. I don't know. And then I realized, I voiced that to somebody and they were like, well, like, how are you going to travel all the time? Like when you have kids? Right? Like they're traveling all over the world. And I thought, oh, okay. So like, that's not a good mom job. And then I wanted to be a seminary teacher. And at the time when I was in high school, women who were married were not allowed, who had children, right? If you're married and you have kids, you're not allowed to be a full-time seminary teacher and get paid. You could do like a sub if they needed you. But you weren't allowed to do that. And I think also at the MTC, you weren't allowed to be a full-time employee. So those were the ones I wanted to do, but you weren't allowed as a woman. And so I just was like, okay, like I can't do any of those things. And again, nobody's talking to you about what career you might want to do because you're just going to be a stay-at-home mom. So I kind of was like, I'm either going to be a stay-at-home mom or dead. So like
dead because of
the second coming. Yeah.
Okay. So that end of times prepper stuff was real. Not necessarily prepper, but just.
Yeah, like definitely end of times. Like I really did not think about life outside of high school.
Wow.
Like I did not think of a future outside of graduation.
Because Jesus was coming.
Yeah.
And that was were your teachers teaching you that? Were your parents teaching you that?
There was just so much of like, you're the chosen generation, right? Like, yeah, like it was everywhere, right? And then like the world was just so horrible. And like, that was like, I always would think like, well, this sucks because I just got here. And the world is already so evil, you know?
Yeah. Oh. That's sad.
Yeah.
Really? Yeah.
Mormonism has some really, I would say, horrific teachings around race. And whether it's the Book of Mormon teaching that God cursed the Lamanites with dark skin to make them loathsome to the white Nephites, whether it's the curse of Cain teaching that God turned Cain's skin dark for killing his brother Abel, and that darkness was a mark. That's in the Book of Moses. It's in the Book of Abraham, which is Joseph Smith produced scripture. It's in the Doctrine and Covenants. And then there's just the priesthood ban that Brigham Young implemented, that black members couldn't hold the priesthood of men or go to the temple if men or women. And then finally, there's the Bruce R. McConkie teaching that people were black because in the pre-existence they were fence sitters or less valiant. And so that they earned, in a bad way, dark skin as a debit or as a curse for their lack of righteousness in the pre-existence. So were you taught any of that through high school, seminary, through your senior year, any of that? And I can relist them if it's helpful. And then if so, how did you work through that in your brain?
Yeah, no, I wasn't taught any of that.
What? What about the Book of Mormon, the Lamanites and
I
the Nephites?
did know the Lamanites, but we were taught that those were Native Americans, so
Didn't
I got
apply
off
to you.
free there.
Okay, but you didn't know there was a priesthood ban prior to 1978?
No, I didn't
What?
know any of that until my mission.
What?
Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
No.
And your parents never told you?
No.
I'm not trying to shame them.
No, which is so interesting because, like, it wasn't until my mission that I realized, like, even when my parents were adopting us, right, they told us, like, that their family and neighbors had a really hard time with them adopting interracially. And so I never put two and two on why. I just was like, yeah, people used to be racist back then. I never knew until my mission of like, oh, it's because like that was taught that like interracial marriage, adoption was bad.
According to Mormon teachings.
Mormons. Yeah.
Because that's another thing I didn't mention is that for decades the Mormon Church taught interracial marriage is evil, is bad, right?
Yeah.
But you never learned that growing up.
No, I did not
Wow.
learn that growing up.
I mean, I'm torn. Like on the one hand, I want to believe you would have had informed consent. On the other hand, that's crappy stuff to learn when you're being raised in this culture and in this church. So I'm part, not that it's my job to feel happy or sad for you, but part of me is happy you didn't have to carry that burden.
Yeah.
And then part of me just feels outraged that
Yeah.
that was kept from you till you were an adult.
Yeah.
How do you feel about it? Maybe that's more important.
Yeah. Well,
Good job, John. Good job.
I think like I carried an invisible weight because of not knowing that and really thinking that like racism's over. Like we don't have to like
Yes.
talk about this stuff. Like I think that it played into why boys would say I'm not attracted to black girls or want to just think that I was just someone who just wanted to make out or get sexual gratification from, but not someone who they felt like was a good partner because literally this color of my skin. Like, so I think looking back, yeah, I could see like, yeah, that was like, it would have been nice to know because it would have helped my understanding and not felt so much grief over being like, why am I being treated this way? Or why does this feel just so heavy to be black, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
But no, I did not know any of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So should we talk about mission next? Or is
I
there-
had one more question.
please.
With regard to, so during your kind of your high school teen years, I feel like the church, and we could look at your family system too, and even your growing sense of kind of self. What were you taught to value about yourself on young women's also? Like, do you remember what you were taught gave you value? And then also, do you remember also being aware of things that you would feel devalued about?
Yeah, absolutely. Like the biggest thing was virtue, right? Your virtue above all else is what made you like a prize.
Yeah.
So in my young women's class, when I was just barely a Laurel, the teacher had a sucker gave it to the first person and said to pass it to the next one to eat. Luckily I had really great, like, again, friends in that young women's class, and each of them took the sucker and licked it and passed it on. So that's who they were
that
dealing
object
with.
lesson failed.
Yes. It failed royally, and I'm so happy it did because like it
Yes.
cemented in my mind, you know, of solidarity among women
Yes.
and
Changing the narrative.
yeah, and changing it and being like my friend literally said, she's like, I will take your guys' sloppy seconds any day.
Yeah, that's
And-
beautiful.
So the teacher was like, okay, well that failed. And so she went into like, well, sex isn't that great anyway. So don't be doing that. And so I don't know. It was just,
Wow.
but I think virtue was probably the biggest thing that like where your value hung. And I feel like I kind of tried to like there was a lot of cognitive dissonance when it came to myself, because I was like, well, technically I'm still a virgin because I technically have not had like actual sex. But when a friend's mom explained to me that, I just remember she wasn't a member or anything, but she was like, well, virginity is a social construct, and technically, even if you're doing oral sex, that is sex. And I broke down crying in her kitchen, like, oh my gosh. Like I have lost, like I lost something.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, and I hate these terms now, but it's like you had the status of virginity or purity.
Exactly.
And then you, quote, are no longer pure.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
And just so people know, I hate this language. But
yeah, exactly that. Somehow I was less pure, and now I was like, great, I'm going to have to like tell my future husband about this, or even lessons in young women's having to write letters to your future husband. Just like weird stuff like that you're just like, above all else, like your value comes from your womb and from your virtue. And so I feel like navigating that, I always felt a sense of like, I don't know, like that I thought I was a whore, right? But I was okay with it because I had other friends that like thought the same way, you know? And even sometimes with like guys thinking that you were that, so it meant that they could treat you however they wanted to treat you. Like I remember one time with this guy that I was just like fooling around with, and he made a comment of like, well, I would want to, maybe one day we'll get married. And I so immaturely was like, oh, no, like my future husband would not be participating in these sort of activities.
It's a loss.
Yeah. And so I was like, no.
Yeah.
And I know it hurt his feelings because he's like, well, you're just a whore. And I said to him, well, this is one whore you're not going to get with. So, yeah. But I didn't disagree with him, right? Like I was like, yeah, I am. But that doesn't mean that you get to treat me that way, you know?
Interesting. Yep.
I love it that in your perception of your own damagedness according to the church, you still had this sense of confidence and resilience.
Yeah, like inner fire, honestly.
I love that.
Yeah, and like makes me emotional almost because because I feel like I felt that all growing up. And almost felt really stifled, you know, of like, I just had like a big personality or big energy, and I was constantly trying to change it, you know. I felt like it was a weakness to be that way.
Oh, so like you need to be smaller, quieter, less.
Yeah. And like, I don't know, like, yeah, I felt overwhelmed because I was like, I need to stop speaking my mind. I need to stop acting this way for some reason, you know?
Yeah.
So make yourself small.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, and just be quiet and go along with status quo, right? Like more boys would like me if I just was less.
Yes.
You know?
Took up less space.
Yeah.
Yeah. A little follow-up question. Do you remember in your teen years ever noticing a kind of representation on the stand or in leadership when it came to either women or people of color? Like, do you remember a general conference or on Sundays or ever noticing anything about that? It's okay if not. I'm just curious, like, in your perception, what was being flagged and what wasn't?
Yeah, I never, besides from Genesis, I didn't see people on the stand that was like a person of color. Like, that was really the only time that I would see that. And I just didn't have the wherewithal to like, to understand that it was like hurting me, you know?
Yeah.
But I never noticed or paid much attention and didn't notice like how few female speakers there were. I was really taught that like patriarchy was God's way and that the man leading the home is how God wants it. And that is like the correct way for society to be.
Yeah. That is the way. That is the Mormon way.
Yeah.
So I guess prior to your mission, there was no awakening around either, let's just say, systemic racism or misogyny and sexism. Like all was well in Zion on both those fronts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Though it sounds like you had moments. You had definitely had moments of that dissonance because you have expressed racism, like going to school, or you have expressed some of that. So, right? That being part of your experience, but just not cognitively something that you know that you're...
I think the biggest thing missing was the language, right? Around what this was or what was happening, right? I didn't have language to describe any of this that was going on.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Or context or history, because you clearly were feeling, I don't fit in.
Yeah.
I'm not fitting in. But you had no clue as to why.
That's right.
Exactly.
You got no information.
Yeah, exactly. And even when I had, like, we never talked about sexuality, like the big topics that I feel like make up human beings, of like talking about racism or sexism and like your experience. Like, I didn't have words for that. Like, I had a family member in high school who was molested by another family member that was my same age, went to the same school, right?
The molester or the molested?
The molester.
Okay.
Yeah, went to the same school. And I didn't even know, like, I was probably like 7 years later that I learned the word pedophile, right? Of like what that is to describe what happened.
Because the victim was a child.
A child, yes.
Okay.
That is so powerful.
Yeah. And it's like, we just like, even when it happened, my mom told me what happened. And it was just like, I don't know, it was so gross to me, but like there was no language given to like, this person is a pedophile, you know?
So basically no systemic evaluation, no the racism, sexism, homophobia, misogyny, abuse, corporate misuse of power, any analysis on a systemic level was just absent from your upbringing, right?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And like, that was in the past, right? Racism was in the past. It's over now.
Yeah.
Sexism was in the past. It's over now.
God's way is patriarchy.
Yes.
Right.
And white.
Yeah.
I mean, the power of language, I think that is just something to really, like, I'm absorbing that. And Alok, who is a poet, activist, just a beautiful human, says something to the effect of like, you can speak something into existence and you can omit it out. Meaning just when you don't have language, there's no existence for it. And that is the power of language, that you can literally, it speaks your experience into existence.
100%. That like describes it perfectly, of like, because there was no talking about it, no language about it, it didn't exist. Right.
You just felt something was off.
Yeah. It was
in
like,
in a lot of ways.
yeah, it's like the Truman Show. You know you're being videotaped. You know people are acting weird.
Yes.
But you cannot put your finger on it. And then they're just over there doing the commercial. Buy cacao. It's the best cocoa from the mountains. And you're just like, what is going on?
Yes.
Like, this is so weird.
Wow, this is powerful. Thank you for, it's not your job to kind of teach us what this is like, but we're really grateful you're willing to help us understand this perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so is your mission where the Truman Show moment where the light falls from the sky and crashes on the ground and he like looks up and starts realizing there's something wrong? Was that on your mission where that started to happen?
Yeah, absolutely.
Should we go there next, or is there more?
No, that's perfect. I feel like when I decided to go on a mission, it was like I was going to clean up my act, right?
And wasn't this right around the mission age change?
It was right as it changed. Yeah.
So what year approximately?
I left, it changed in 2012.
Okay.
And I graduated high school in 2013.
Okay.
And so
what did the change mean to you?
So I had heard rumors that they were going to change the age for a mission. So I had written in my journal, like, if the age changes, I'll go on a mission. Because in my patriarchal blessing, it said that I would serve a mission if I so desired. And at the time, I did not desire at all. Because I knew sister missionaries, right? Like, I don't know, like, if it was like the churches, if they wanted to just make them look as frumpy as possible, or like, I don't know. It was just, if you saw a sister missionary, like, that was their like dress code. And I was like, I cannot wear that. Like, I cannot wear those clothes. And so that was like a big reason why I did not want to go, was because I just did not want to look like that. Yeah.
And the age before the change was 21 for women, and they lowered it to 19.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. Okay.
So it's kind of like the visual of a sister missionary. You were like, no, that's not a fit.
Yeah.
Older and frumpy.
Yeah, because my parents, like, we were Mormon, but like I was still allowed to wear shorts to mid-thigh.
Yeah.
And I was still allowed to, like, I had like a purple streak in my hair or red. Like, I was still allowed to like look normal and not so like,
yeah,
I don't know, like they all just look the same, right? And that literally is the uniform, right? Like, you have a uniform for sister missionaries, and that is what they decided on. And I felt like that was like a fashion like they should not have done that. Like, it was, yeah.
So what changed?
I felt convicted that I needed to go on a mission when they changed the age. I didn't necessarily want to, but I felt like that's like what God wanted me to do, and that I shouldn't be partying. I didn't know where I wanted to go for college or anything. Nobody really talked to me about that. So I just kind of was like, this is the next step. Like, I don't know how to figure out how to go to college. And at the time, I barely graduated seminary, but they asked me to speak at seminary graduation. I don't know. So I just was like, this is like my calling, right? Was to like go on a mission and serve God. And so I decided that it was the next best step to do, was to go on a mission.
Okay, so you put in your papers. What did you do the year before your mission? After graduation?
So I turned 19. I was older for my age.
Oh, okay.
So like 3 months after I graduated, I was 19. So I put my mission papers in while I was still in high school.
Wow.
And, you know, it felt great. Like I had a lot of guy friends that were all going on missions, and I really didn't want to get married. I knew 3 people in high school that were already engaged to get married at 17.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I just was like, that's not what I want to do. I'm definitely not ready to get married. And it felt like that was like either go on a mission, go to college, and if you go to college, you're probably going to get married.
Yep.
And so I put in my papers when I was still in high school, got my calling. I think even before I graduated high school, I had already got my calling.
Wow.
Yeah.
And where'd you get called to?
To Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was so random because 2 other kids in my ward got called to the same mission. I guess not random. I think that's the opposite of random, right? But 2 other kids got called to the same mission. And so did a couple kids from my high school. My friends got called to the same mission as well. And so, yeah, went to the ATL. And I love the MTC because I was only there 11 days. And everybody that I knew from all the different high schools that we'd go to, like, we're all there at the MTC.
Your extroverted self was just basking.
It was so fun.
All those kids you had partied with, basically.
Yeah.
were at the
They
FCC.
were all on
They all were on the mission train.
purity plan. How do I restore?
Did you do that bishop confession where you like, oh, I have to confess everything to my bishop to make sure I'm worthy to go on the mission kind of thing?
Yes, I was going to, but he was my brother's father-in-law, still is, right? At the time. And so when I went to be like, I was like, I have a lot. Like I was like I brought like
You're going to be here a while.
I brought like a list of things to get into. And he said, I don't need to know. He like stopped me before I said anything. He just said, all I need to know is that, like, are you willing to not do those things again? And I said, yeah. And he said, are you willing to hang out with like better influences of friends and not do this? And I said, yeah. And so
Wow, you got up easy.
I know.
That's fortuitous.
Yeah. But I think he just didn't want to know. Like I'm still like that sister-in-law is my closest sister-in-law. Her younger siblings were my closest friends.
Yeah.
Like I think he genuinely was like sparing us both because it's like I still see them
Yeah.
to this day at birthday parties, at, you know, events. So I think he just, he didn't want to know.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, so you didn't have that grist mill of guilt in the MTC.
Yeah, no, I was clean, baby. I'd gone to the
Clean and
priest, I'd
social.
gone to the bishop, I'd crossed all of my T's, dotted all my I's.
You were pure in the eyes of 2 churches,
Yeah,
not just
2.
one.
Yeah, I could have gone and got baptized over there, too.
All right, so how's your mission?
So like I said, the MTC was so much fun, like just a party. My actual mission once I got to Atlanta, I instantly loved Atlanta. Like the fact that you could be walking on the street and like hearing all this different types of music, like it felt like I had like come home like to Atlanta and seen just so many different types of Black people. Like it was so fun, like to see all the culture and like have people be like, do you want to listen to my mixtape? I'm like, yes, I would love to. Like, but my first companion, that was my trainer, was awful. And
You used an adjective to describe her in your outline.
Yeah, I did. Because I'm still like, I'm going to be bitter about it till the day I die. And I do not care.
What was the adjective you used?
I did called her a bitch. But
Was it ho bitch? What, did I misremember
I don't
that?
know. She just was so awful. She was older than me by a lot. I think by like 4 or 5 years.
Oh,
because,
wow.
right, like when the age change happened, you still had sister missionaries that were older, and then all of these like younger ones coming in. So she, I think at the time was like 24 or 25. She had her master's degree. So
Wow.
I think that's like around 25, right?
Yeah.
Typically when somebody has their master's. And she did not let us forget that she had her master's degree. She did not. She just was very like, I don't know. She was just, I think she knew she was mean. Like she'd always tell me like, I have to break you down to build you back up. And I would say like, you're going to have to try harder. Cause I played basketball my whole life and I've had coaches that could eat you for breakfast. Like nothing you do is going to make me, like she wanted to see me cry. Like she would say that, like, why do you never cry? And I'm just like, you will never see me. Like, I know this game. You'll never see me cry. You
Wow,
know?
that's your companion.
Yes.
That's your first?
Not my first companion.
Your trainer.
My
Your
trainer.
trainer.
Yeah, so you're with him 12 weeks. First companion, yeah. And she thought she was just the best trainer. But then she would say comments. I think going to Atlanta too was like people on the street would try and grab me to like save me from Mormonism.
What? Explain that.
So like we'd be on the street like with our tags, right? And like somebody who was black would be like, do you need help? I will help you get out of this. Like
you were in a cult or something?
Yeah. Yeah. And that I was brainwashed. They're like, you don't.
Imagine.
Yeah. And so they would be like, some guy would be like, I have, like, you can get on this bus with me right now. Like, and I'd be like, stop, like, terrified, right? Like, that it was just a surreal experience.
Yeah.
Because then they'd be like, how did you get into this, right? Like, Black people don't join that church. Like, and this is when I started to learn the actual history of the church and why Black people felt this way.
Right.
You know?
How did you first respond? So somebody's saying, this is not a church Black people are a member of. What was your initial faithful response?
Well, I'm Black, so, and I'm a member. And then I would tell them that they're like, well, how'd you join? Like, how old were you? And I was like, well, I was adopted. And then they would be like, oh, like, that makes sense.
What did that feel like?
Typically after, I would just be like trying to convert them, right? Of like, look, like, this is different now. Like, come on, like, I'm in this church, like, we believe in Christ, right? And this church has the authority of Jesus Christ to actually operate correctly, right? To get you back to heaven.
Wow.
And channeling your most faithful early missionary self, someone you meet in the Atlanta streets is like, oh, that church is racist. What would you say?
If they said it was racist, first of all, racism is over. So I don't think I knew enough about racism to argue that. I would say, well, like, I was raised by white parents who love me, and I've been a part of this church my whole life. So I don't see how it could be racist.
Yes.
It's just very naive, right? Very obviously. And I think to them it was obvious that I didn't know like the history of the church, right? It was very obvious to them. And that's why they were like, let me save you.
So you said you started learning some history. Do you want to talk about how that happened?
Yeah.
And was that a result of having these comments and these experiences?
Yes, absolutely. Because it does feel like when you get called to Atlanta or the South as a Black missionary, that your job is to convert other Black people, right? So the first ward that I was in, the Atlanta ward, is a Black ward. Like, if you've seen Meet the Mormons, the guy Sullivan, he was our bishop at the time, Bishop Sullivan. And so I don't know, like, when I went to that ward, I was like, this is how it should be. Like, it was like Baptist more than it was Mormon.
Yeah.
It was
Like
Gladys.
gospel choir kind of thing?
Yeah, it was Gladys Knight's ward, and her choir is like met there, right? So you
Yeah.
felt really like empowered as a Black
Yeah.
person. And when I met Gladys Knight, I was like crying, like, yes, like I've come home. Like,
I can imagine. That
Yeah.
makes sense. Yeah.
and it felt very faith promoting, right? To be in that ward because everyone was Black, right?
Yeah.
It was like the opposite. Like in Utah, typically I'm like the only Black person in the room. In the Atlanta ward, my companion was the only white person in the room.
But she had a master's degree.
She did have a master's degree, and she let us know. And she would always just talk down on Utah Mormons. And that made me so mad. It was just like, you are the worst Utah Mormon. She's not even from Utah. She was from California. But I was like, but you act like all of them do. And she would make comments that were microaggressions, right? That I didn't realize were, she'd be like, wow, this member can pay for their hair, but they can't pay for tithing. It's like, damn, like,
Yeah.
wow. Like,
This is a woman of color.
she's white.
No, I mean the member that was.
Yeah.
It's like she can pay for her hair.
But she can't pay for
Yeah,
anything.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a microaggression. Yeah.
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 And so it was just like, and at the time it just like infuriated me, but I felt like the best thing to do was like, be Christ-like, swallow it back. Like my mission was where I was going to change everything that was like bad about me, right? Like I was going to learn humility, to hold my tongue and not say anything. And so I didn't, right? Like I just was like, okay, like this, I just need to learn humility.
Wow.
And she had never had a baptism there until I came, right? And I think it's obvious why so many members wanted to get baptized once they saw, like, right? Like it was like when they'd send two little white missionaries out, two little white sister missionaries, and that's everyone's thinking is like, this church is racist. And then now that you have like a Black missionary who's like telling you, no, like this church is good. Like, of course they'll convert after. Yeah.
So that word felt like coming home, you said.
Yeah. It was so much fun. There was literally like 10 sets of missionaries in that ward.
In one ward?
Wow.
I've never heard of 10 sets of missionaries
I.
Yeah.
in a single ward.
In a single ward. Yep.
Huh.
And that, yeah. Because with the age change came a huge flux of missionaries, and then they separated the Atlanta mission into 3 missions. So before it was only 1 mission. And then there were so many missionaries that you had the Georgia Atlanta North mission and the Macon mission, and then the regular Georgia Atlanta mission. And so that ward, yeah, we had 10 sets. And that's what everyone would say. They had a missionary book in that ward where they would take your picture as soon as you got there, and then you would write down the date that you got there. Like they were so proud to have the most missionaries. And that ward had like 3,000 people on the roster and only like 80 people coming. Because
It sounds like Latin America, basically.
I was about to say, because people got baptized to get on church welfare. That was like why the ward was so big. Is like they were like, get baptized, you can get on welfare, and we'll help you pay for this. And so when I got there, our job was to, like, we would just get lists every week of people to contact to confirm their address. And then if they were, like, the bishop was just going through to tell people that they can no longer be on welfare through the church. Yeah.
So you were saying you started learning about the church's history. Do you want to talk about how that happened? And
Yeah. So I feel like I heard inklings of it when I first got to Atlanta because of people saying different things, right? That like they would tell me on the street when we would be contacting that our church believes that we have the curse of Cain. And I'd be like, I've never heard that before. Or our church didn't let Black people participate up until a certain time. And I was like, I've never heard that before. And then I started wanting to get more into church history because someone who we were teaching, he was a Mason, a Freemason. And so that's why he was willing to talk to us. He said, I've heard about Joseph Smith. I'm a Freemason. And I know about Joseph Smith, like, right? The Book of Mormon. And so we started talking to him, and yeah, he ended up getting baptized. And that kind of dove me into like Freemasonry and like the Joseph Smith's like history with all of that stuff. And so I learned more about I didn't know about Bruce R. McConkie's book, and I read that, right? I hadn't read all the way through the like Pearl of Great Price or D&C or all of that.
Yeah.
And so I started reading all of that. And yeah, I just was very, very hurt about what I found. And very just like, I don't know, I feel like it was almost like a dream what I was reading, because I was like, why would my parents not teach me this? Like, why would they not tell me about this?
Yeah.
Because it did feel like a betrayal at the time.
Yeah.
And it felt like convenient for them to not have to wrestle with that, you know, like a luxury to not have to even feel like you have to like give that information to someone.
Yeah.
So normally missionaries have limited access to like books or the internet. So I'm kind of wondering what your sources of information were beyond just talking to people. And then once you're feeling frustrated that information was withheld from you, and even frustrated at your parents, if you had any way to talk to anyone about that.
Yeah.
Those are two questions.
No, those are great questions. So the only things that I had were at like in the ward, you know, like how there's the library. So anything in there is what I had.
So you would just check it out?
Yeah. So like Bruce R. McConkie's book was in there, Mormon Doctrine, or I would ask other missionaries if they had this book, and they would send it to me. Even like, oh my gosh, Tim Ballard's book on
Visions of Glory?
No, on Mormons and Freemasons and Mormons or something. My brother sent it to me to read. And so, yeah, that was really it. Or Gospel Library. When we'd go to the library to like email our parents, I could go onto the church's website and read.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you're doing this studying. Who do you talk to about it?
I didn't talk to anybody about it.
So you're feeling this anger for your parents, for example, and you're just keeping it inside?
Yeah. The only time I would ask somebody a question about it was like the ward mission leader. And the answers would be really sucky. Like I'd ask like, are Black people, like, do we have the curse of Cain? And he was like, well, that's what Bruce R. McConkie says. Or like that's just like he's like, I don't know. Like, that's what it says there, you know? And a lot of times, like, the ward mission leaders and stuff, like, they're converts themselves. So,
right.
Like, they don't, I don't know. I feel like maybe somebody in Utah would have more tact to, like, if they were, since they're raised in it, they kind of know the cultural stuff. And, like, with, like, ward mission leaders, they would just be like, yeah, that's what it says. Like, and so you're just like,
too bad, so sad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So what did you do with this troubling history you were learning?
I think I internalized it a lot and prayed a lot to God to, like, why would he make me this way? Like, it was like, I felt like all those experiences that I had growing up of people mistreating me, made sense and it felt deserved, right? That like, this is how God has it, you know? And it, especially being in Atlanta and seeing the poverty, it felt like I was just seeing my people suffer, and that, yeah, that it was true, right? Because I'm just seeing people be so poor, you know, and women and children, and like I taught a lot of single moms, you know, and I just felt like how else, when you're like Mormon, you want to explain why things are this way and why these women have to suffer. And
Yeah.
so that was my way of explaining it, was like, for whatever reason, like God wants it this way. And so I guess that's just like our lot in life, right? Is to be treated this way.
And Mormonism takes it a little farther, because it's not just that God wants it, it's that they deserved it because they made bad choices in
Exactly.
the pre-existence, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's awful.
Yeah. And that's what I felt like. And I felt like, I don't know, like in some ways, like I related to these single moms of feeling like a whore and like feeling like just like I made these horrible choices, and so now I have to live with it, you know? And maybe if like, right, if they wouldn't have slept around or done this or known better, then their life wouldn't be like this.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how did that make your mission once you start having this awakening?
Very hard, because at the same time I got transferred to an area, Barnesville, Georgia, that was like being thrown back into the 50s, in terms of like how I started being treated, right? Of people yelling the N-word at us to get off their lawn, telling us they're gonna get their gun, like.
So this is a white area predominantly?
So it was literally like out of a movie, right? Like you go over to one side of the tracks, and that's where all the black people lived. The other side of the tracks is where all the white people lived.
Yeah.
And then they still, on Wednesdays, everything was closed until 2 p.m. in honor of the slave trade. So, yeah, I guess during that time, everything would be closed so that people could go to the auction blocks.
What?
Yeah. And so they still honored that, like, all the way in 2013, right? They still honored that everything was closed.
Wow.
So there's an annual holiday or celebration
It's every Wednesday.
It's weekly.
weekly?
Where everything was closed. You couldn't go to the library, you couldn't go to like the store, because nobody had work until 2 p.m. And it was because that town was a slave town where they would do, like, the railroad came through it, and that's until 2 p.m. there would be auctions. And they just kept it.
Wow. Yeah.
Isn't that crazy? And so I'm like, even like being thrown back into like, well, if racism is dead, why are we still doing this?
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
It was rough. And my companion at the time, I had a new companion, and she was great. Except she was really sick. She had a cyst in her sinuses. And so she was dealing with like these headaches where she would get like vertigo and would just have to lie down. And so she's dealing with that illness. And then we're also just being like hit on every side. Like, black people hated us because I had my white companion with me. I will say though that like the black people were a lot nicer than the white people and would actually like let us in sometimes, you know, but they still were mad, like,
Yeah.
obviously, you know, whereas white people just, like, I was just full on scared for my life, you know?
Wow.
Yeah, and people still had their Confederate flags hanging,
Yeah.
you know, and I learned very quickly, like, to not go to the houses that had any Confederate flag hanging, because it's just dangerous, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, and my mission president just, like, I don't know, like, I felt like the other missionaries that I was with, my companion, like, was so great during that time, and like I don't know how she was able to like have empathy for like the situation, but like didn't make me feel crazy, you know?
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like my mission president or other people, like, you know, like the Elder Holland talk of like, I think he gave it to missionaries of like, you have to go through Gethsemane to get out the other side. Like the Savior had to do it. You have to do it. That was like the suggestion to watch to like toughen up, you know? And it was like, nobody's understanding like
Yes.
the stress and the fear that I was under, like, and again, it made me like upset with my parents to be like, why didn't you tell me? Like, I don't know. Like, it was just,
Yeah.
it was scary and it was a lot, like, emotionally to deal with.
You just didn't know the world could be like this, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And like, I would take like a microaggression over full on aggression any day, you know?
Yeah.
And then it's like, for me, like I'm an achiever, right? Like I wanted to hit the numbers and like get baptisms, you know? I wanted to do what was expected, and then to feel like people are like, oh, you guys are just like so unsuccessful, and like not realizing like what we were up against.
Yes. How big it was.
Yeah. And like no matter how much you tried to explain to them, like just the insensitivity of like the situation. Like I would have rather them give my companion like a white companion or me a black companion, so at least like
Yeah.
we could like have one side of the tracks to teach you, you know?
Yeah. It's like by your partnership having one,
It made
you
it
know,
worse.
it's like a walking battlefield.
Yes.
You're like,
Exactly.
yes.
Because the town was so polarized.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. It was just so, I don't know. And it's not good for your health. Like I can't imagine like there was, I don't know. And it just brought a whole new level to being Mormon, right? Like to hearing the white is pure. Like I didn't love the temple, right? But I didn't also like I feel like being in this town made me absolutely hate the temple. I hated wearing white. I hated like just the whole idea of the temple. It made me angry that it was two white people like up on the screen. I just was like,
As Adam and Eve.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what made you, what about this experience? What's this town called again?
Barnesville, Georgia.
What about this town in Barnesville made you start to reflect back on white Adam and Eve and white dress in the temple? How did talk to us about how those connections got made? Because some say that has nothing to do with what's going on in this town. That's
Yeah.
symbolic. That's a religious rite.
Yeah. Exactly.
What made that come to your mind?
Because it put whiteness at a whole new a whole bigger thing, right? Because it's like you have now people who quite literally believe that white is pure. Not just like the color white, but the skin color white is pure, meaning that black is impure, right? Brown skin is impure. And so then you're going to the temple and the same teaching is being taught. And I can't help but feel like, oh, this is like a calling card to like white is pure, as in white skin tone is pure.
Right.
That's why they're not showing a black Adam and Eve, right? Is because white is pure.
Right.
Or Peter, James, and John, or even Satan's white, right?
Yeah. Like you can get a bald guy in there, but you can't get a black guy? Like crazy. And
I've never ever thought about that there's no people of color in the temple ceremony, or at least not when I went.
Yeah, last time I went, there
everything, like so much about the temple is white.
And you're wearing
The
all
decor
white.
is white.
Yeah.
Like everything. Like, yes.
You're
Flesh
wearing
room is
whiteness.
white, right?
Yeah, you're wearing all white. It
Yes.
just became very triggering. And because I was in the States mission, we went to the temple like every 8 weeks. Right? So you're going often to the temple and it becomes very triggering. Even like another set of missionaries were teaching these black kids that wanted to get baptized and they didn't want to get baptized in white. They were like, can't I get baptized in purple or any other color? And they're like, well, white is pure. And they're just like, no, black can be just as pure as white. And they did not want to get baptized in white. And I like agreed with them. I was like, yeah, like tell them like you don't have to get baptized in white. And then just hearing that a lot, like I feel like any time it's like I could hear the tone of like it just felt like we were talking about white so much, you know?
Yeah.
And then the garments being white, it was just like so triggering because I was like, well, I didn't realize this whole time that white meant like literally you have to be a white person.
Yes.
Okay, well, that makes me maybe come back to the question I asked earlier. You're reading the Book of Mormon regularly as a missionary.
Yeah.
And the Book of Mormon literally says white and delightsome, and it says dark and loathsome.
Yeah.
Referring to skin color in the Book of Mormon. Did
you read it
Did you ever have
differently?
that awakening?
Yeah,
or not?
I feel like it was all just like so upsetting, right? Like I was like, it doesn't, like at that point to me, it was like, well, it doesn't matter. Like, what's the difference between a Native American and me, right? What's the difference between a Hispanic person and me and my skin tone? Like, right? Like we're all not white. Like, so I feel like it definitely made me be like, oh, like it doesn't matter if they're Native American or if they're Hispanic or if they're whatever color, this really sucks. And it's just like the only explanation is that's just how it is, you know?
And that's how God is, and that's how God set it up, and that's how God's the one true church is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And this is all hitting you when you're on a mission
Yeah.
for the church that, you know, created a system based on. So how did you do that? How did you, because it's one thing to go through kind of, but under the high control, gotta get up, gotta every day. Like
Yeah.
my understanding is like the schedule is quite, like how did you survive those days?
Like I said, I feel like I had a good companion who, you know, we would just cry together. And that I had great members who I could go to and who understood. Like I had, like at the time, she had just converted to Mormonism. She was a single mom, and I felt like she understood what I was saying. And I was like, well, if she can do it, and if these other Black members can do it, then like I can do it too, you know? So there was other members that were Black, you know, and like,
And aware.
yeah. And it's just like so hard because at the time, like in that town, there was Black churches and there were white churches, right? So you would go, if you were Baptist, you would go to the Black Baptist church. If you were white, you'd go to the White Baptist church. Like the churches were not integrated. So
Still
like
segregated.
going to a Mormon church was the only time that was like the only church in town that was integrated. So it felt progressive, I feel like, in some ways, because it was like you're actually like felt allowed without hostility to like be here, you know, and participate. Whereas you could not go to, as a Black person, to the white church. And so in my head, I literally told myself that like that's why the priesthood ban was a thing, was so that the churches wouldn't be segregated.
Yeah.
Obviously it makes no sense now, but at the time I was like, oh, like if there wouldn't have been a priesthood ban, then there would have been segregated churches and we wouldn't be able to like all meet together.
Yeah, I'm trying to make sense of that. No,
I know.
Yeah.
It literally does not make sense, but neither does Mormonism. So it doesn't really just anything to tell myself to like self-soothe, you know?
That's right. To get through the moment.
Yeah, even if it doesn't make sense.
Was your mission president equipped to answer any of these questions in a way that was satisfying or meaningful?
No, he would just send like in the area, like our area 70 was Black. You know, like that was the answer. It was like, look, there's Black people. Like,
oh, but he wouldn't come talk to you and help you understand or feel better.
No, I think he was just too busy probably to even read my letters. I don't even know if he read because you know how you have to write your mission president every single week? I don't even know if he read those, you know? Because there was like at that point over 250 missionaries in our mission. So
he's like, what's the problem? We have a Black area authority.
Yeah.
Everything's good.
And that's what he would tell us to do. Like, oh, tell him to come with you. And like, I feel like members were very willing to travel from like all the way to it. Because Atlanta compared to Barnesville is like hours away, like 2 hours away. And they would like do that literally to convert other Black people. Yeah. And even in Atlanta, like I had to sit outside of the Book of Mormon musical and try and convert people to Mormonism. It's just like such a weird, and they literally thought we were like part of the play because we were like here. And at the time we'd pass along cards for the I'm a Mormon campaign. And so it's just, I don't know, like,
yeah,
you do start feeling very, like, I feel like other Black missionaries that I've talked to, like, felt very much like used for to get other Black members in.
Yeah.
Is tokenized a fair word or not?
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say that's like what it was to like, yeah. So like, shut up about the stuff you don't like, but help us get these people in, you know?
So as you think about ending your mission and how you were up to the end, if you had to describe overall what your mission was like, what would you say?
It was very rough. I don't think I had the same experience that other missionaries had, right? I would have, like, if I could go back in time, I wouldn't have gone because I just don't think it was healthy for me.
Yeah.
When I was in Barnesville, I ended up getting really sick where my nose was like so swollen. I had to go home for a couple weeks to get surgery. And so I went home, got this surgery, and I didn't want to go back out, right? And instead of having like a conversation about this is what's so hard about sometimes just the culture, I guess, of Mormonism, is that we just don't talk about things. like my mom and dad could see that I was just not mentally healthy, you know, and recognized that, but didn't have a conversation around it, right? I still was not like released from being a missionary. So the whole 3 weeks that I was home, I still had to wear my name tag and wake up, read scriptures, yada, yada. And while I was home, I was hanging out with, so the other 2 kids that got sent to the same mission as me, these boys, they came home early. So both of them had just like mental health struggles. And one of them in particular, I would say it was like a full mental breakdown where he was suffering from memory loss. And he ended up committing suicide while I was there.
Oh.
And yeah, and it was just like surreal. Like I'm like trying to recover from this, no surgery, you know, and then finding out that he had passed away. Just like there's nobody like in the community that like to like help when these things happen. And so I don't even think one of his brothers came home from his mission. I think he stayed out on his mission.
For the funeral?
Yeah. And my other close friends, I don't know, like it was just so weird. Like I feel like our parents like recognized how hard this was for all of us, but didn't have the tools to like
Intervene.
to like get us help, you know?
Yeah.
And I fought because like we all went to church like 2 days after, like everyone was just devastated, you know?
Yeah.
But people were like bearing their testimonies, right? His other brother had just gotten home from a full-time mission and like bore his testimony. And so I decided that I would go back out on my mission and finish. And my mission president said that I couldn't stay for the funeral. So I left the day of the funeral, the morning of, and didn't stay. And I ended up, my flight was so delayed, I just sat on the tarmac all day.
Oh. I am so sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess, like, I didn't think to call my parents because that's, like, a mission rule, right? To not, like, I was like, I'm, like, set apart. I can't call my parents to let them know, like, that I'm on the tarmac just sitting here, you know? And I didn't have a phone. I was just alone. And so when I finally got to Atlanta, I was supposed to get there that afternoon, but I didn't end up getting there until, like, late in the evening. I guess, like, my mission president was like, we've been looking for you all over. You need to call your mom because she's worried. And my mom on the phone said that she thought I had ran away or hurt myself. And I don't know, like, it's hard to, like, realize that, like, that your parents knew how devastating it was for, you know, like, when somebody commits suicide, they say, like, it affects the whole community, you know? And it's like, I wasn't, like, super close with this kid. I just went over to their house. He was, like, a friend of a friend, you know? And we grew up in the same ward and stuff. And so, but it just, like, I don't know. Like, I feel like his death, like, for me not to be like melodramatic, like signified like the death of like our childhood, you know, like we're adults now. And I just couldn't wrap my head around why or how somebody could do that, you know? It was just so mind-blowing to me, like of, I don't know, just so shocking, like even to this day that like, I don't know.
And he had gone on a mission, right?
Yeah, he'd come home
He came home early. Yeah, like there could be an entire podcast dedicated to missionaries telling stories of horrific things that happened on their mission
Yeah.
that broke them or that caused serious depression or anxiety
Yeah.
and suicidality. But, and that's when you mentioned the Book of Mormon musical, it's so interesting because the Book of Mormon musical starts out with this really idealistic version of missions, and it's like Orlando, and we're going to Disneyland, but then they end up in in an African country, and there's warlords, and people are killed right in front of them.
Yeah,
that Mormon missionaries have those experiences all the time. Margie's brother had people pull guns on them, and on him, like hold the gun to his chest. You know what I mean? Like. People have all sorts of really traumatizing experiences on missions.
Yeah.
But
where you're not protected.
Yeah.
You're young and you're not protected and you don't have resources.
Yeah. And you're almost like also, I feel like compared to like other people, you really are a little bit less mature when it comes to how the real world works.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so you have this, at least my idea of people growing up in Utah is that they're so great, you know? And so when guys are rolling down their window and say, hey, do you need a ride? I'm thinking, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. Instead of, I don't know. And then it's just all implied. Like, instead of saying, like, you could be robbed, you could be raped, like, you could this, like, it's just
here
implied.
are the dangers, here are what they are.
It's just, like, it's dangerous. But, like, to a kid who doesn't recognize what is so dangerous, you know? It doesn't make sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I literally went immediately back to my mission, and I started having panic attacks after that.
Yeah.
And it was just weird. Like, I can't explain how surreal it was to be like, I don't know, to be like my friend like committed suicide a couple weeks ago and people just be like, oh, like, just no reaction, you know? It was just like, give me something. Like, I don't know. And so it made me think that maybe I was just being dramatic for feeling something towards it, you know? And for feeling so much grief around it. I thought, and so I would tell myself that, like, well, we weren't that close of friends to like get over it, you know? But yeah, when somebody commits suicide, it doesn't matter how close a friend you are. It can still feel like a big loss, even if you don't see them every day, you know, or hang out with them. It still feels like, I don't know, surreal to be like, the world is really sad, like that somebody would do that.
And that's just a lot to be raised in a somewhat idyllic way. And then to have all that experience, all that poverty and trauma and disillusionment and awakening on your mission and have a friend die. That's a lot in a year, right? For one person to...
Yeah, it was in 6 months.
Yeah.
So it's like, just a lot to cope with. And then to just be like your parents, like recognizing that it's hard, but like them not have the tools themselves to be like, stay home, like go see a counselor, you know?
Yeah.
My mission president had my companion at the time take me over to like the mission counselor's house because he switched me areas after this happened. He put me in his area, you know, where the mission home was. And yeah, it was just so weird because it wasn't like a traditional counseling session. And I felt like so uncomfortable to have my mission companion there, plus this counselor and her husband there. Asking me questions about what had happened, that I just pretended like I was fine, you know? Because I was just like, I'm not going to like be on it. Like, I don't feel comfortable in this situation to speak on something that's so personal, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mental health services on missions are its own topic.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. And it was just, not the best way to go about it. I think if like, because when I got to the mission, and my mom had said she thought that I had hurt myself. Like, I just, like, the whole car ride home, it was just me and the mission president, and I just didn't even talk. I just cried the whole time. And he asked, like, if I wanted food, and I couldn't eat. I couldn't anything. And so obviously in his eyes, he was like, wow, something's wrong with this missionary. But again, there was just no
words
or tools to like get me the help. Because what somebody I think should have happened was asking, like, do you want to talk to somebody about this?
Absolutely.
But nobody asked me. He just had my mission companion drag me to this house, you know? And when I started having panic attacks, I didn't know what they were. I just felt like I was like a failure, and like there was never enough time in the day to like get everything done. Like, I just felt so overwhelmed, you know? And my companion at the time thought it was just Satan. And I thought it was Satan too, you know?
Yeah.
That's how I contextualized it, was like, oh, Satan's just trying really hard. Yeah, because again, we didn't have the language around. I didn't learn what a panic attack was until like 10 years after that happened, you know?
Just mental health awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how did your mission end?
So it ended with, I just couldn't wait to go home. Like, I was so exhausted. And at the time I didn't know it was like depression, you know, because I kept waking up every day. I still followed the mission schedule. I still had baptisms, lots of baptisms, you know. So I was still doing everything, but it felt heavier and harder to wake up at 6:30 in the morning and keep going, you know? And so by the time I got to the end of my mission, my mission president wanted me to stay because I said I wanted to go home at my original date, because the 3 weeks that I was home, I was only home 3 weeks, and they were hell. I felt like it was still part of my mission, you know?
You said you were still doing all the things. You were still reading your scriptures. You were still,
They wouldn't allow me to be set apart. So I was still technically a missionary for those 3 weeks that I was home. But he said that, well, technically a full-time mission
Oh my gosh.
is 18 months. And so if you want to have been considered for a full-time mission.
Meaning released honorably is the term, right?
Exactly.
To be given an honorable release, he's saying you have to stay an extra month, basically.
Yeah, and then I said, well, I'll stay an extra 3 weeks. Can I go home in the middle of the transfer?
No.
And he said no. And so I said that I can't stay an extra 3 weeks because I can't stay an extra, because that would be extra 3 weeks then that I would stay. So technically I'd be extending my mission 3 weeks. And I just said, like, I was literally like crying, and I said, well, then I have to make the decision to be dishonorably released because I can't keep going. Like, I cannot.
Yeah.
Yeah. But luckily for me, When I had my exit interview, he said the Spirit had confirmed to him
Oh my gosh.
that I was honorably released.
It's so bizarre because you can serve 10 months and get an honorable release. You can serve 6 months and get an honorable
Yes.
release. But you have this roulette where you just had a weird leader who was being super
Strong
strict
arm.
and then making you feel like you should be grateful at the grace of him or Jesus that you were allowed to.
We deem you honorable.
You gave 18 months, but we're going to make you feel lucky that we allow you to feel good about
That's
your
right.
honorable release.
Yeah.
That's,
I mean, it was, and on the time too, like a lot had happened. My dad had gotten cancer while I was on my mission. My youngest brother decided that he wanted to serve in the military. And out of all the things he could have picked, he picked an army medic. And I was like, that, and we were like in 2014 still at war, you know? And I was like, an army medic, like that is like picking death in my head, you know? So I just felt really stressed out. And then on my mission, when I had come back, I got a really bad speeding ticket because these sister missionaries that lived with us, we couldn't find them and they weren't picking up their phone. And so I legitimately thought that they had been kidnapped, and was so anxious. And then we found them, and then I wanted to make sure to get home in time for curfew. So I was speeding really bad. And in Georgia or just anywhere back east, the highest speed limit is like 55 miles per hour. It's not very high compared to Utah, where it's like 80 miles per hour. But it will be the same type of roads, right? Where it's like a highway, but you can only go 50 miles per hour. So I like got a super speeder ticket, and I got put on probation on my mission with a probation officer and everything.
you're just trying to obey the rules.
Yes.
Right?
Trying to get home
And
in time for curfew.
The officer was such an asshole. He was from Idaho. His name was Officer Woodruff. And so I was like, oh my God, like a miracle. Like, you know Mormons, right? Like, and he was like, yeah, he seemed like he just like did not like Mormons at all. I was like, great. Like, and he's like, where are you guys headed to? The club? And I was like, I'm dressed in a freaking dress to the floor. Like, I don't know what club, like Amish club or something. Like, this is crazy. And I kept telling him, like, I'm just trying to get home for curfew. And he was like, sure you are.
Wow.
Yeah. Then my probation officer, like, was,
What?
yeah, I was on probation
Oh, wow.
from this speeding ticket. So
much intensity. Honestly, you're holding so much during this time.
it was just a nightmare. The probation officer hated me. She's like, why is your license a Utah license if you've lived here? I was like, well, we were called by a prophet of God. Like, and she was just like, literally like, shut up. That's not what I'm asking you.
That's not
real.
That's not a
That's
thing.
not a thing.
And then she was like, literally, like, and my companion sitting there, she's like yelling at us. Like, she's like, would you rather just go to jail? She's like telling me how awful she can make my life. I'm crying. My companion's crying. Like, just a mess. Yeah. And I was just so like, again, like a child dealing with adult situations. Even though I was probably 20 by this time, I was still so mentally like
A young 20.
a kid who just did not understand the world, you know?
And facing really brutal realities all at once about the world. Not just one brutal reality, but like layers of just very traumatizing, brutal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So by the end of my mission, I was like, get me home. Like,
Yeah.
I was very overwhelmed. And I would say now, like, probably experiencing like PTSD like symptoms.
Yep,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
I am not surprised with what you've described.
Complex PTSD.
Yeah. So by the time I got home, like, I just slept for days, you know, like it was so, it's like I knew I had to keep going, but I just felt like a shell of a person. Like I felt so, you know, broken down for Christ. Just like I had given, like Elder Holland had said, my Gethsemane, and I had suffered, and yeah, I was broken for Christ and for Mormonism.
But not in a good way.
No. And I was said by the end of my mission, I said, I will never leave the Mormon Church, because if it's this bad
In it.
well, I just felt like if it's, this bad with it, how bad could it be without it? It's probably just awful.
Wow.
Yeah.
So not okay.
Yeah.
So not okay.
Yeah. So I feel like it just brought a whole new meaning to a broken heart and contrite spirit, right? Yeah. And I feel like I had given so much at that point, you know, like my whole being. I had sacrificed my mental health, my physical health, really, too. Like,
Safety.
yeah, that it felt like, I had paid the cost, and now I can keep living. My family will be blessed, right? And I thought they were, right? My dad's cancer, he was okay. My brother never got deployed as an Army medic. So it felt like I had paid my dues for that, you know?
And maybe you had atoned for your sin as a teenager,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But kind of your body, your health and well-being, right? Your psyche were the cost.
Oh,
That was the payment.
Yeah, definitely. And people would be like, even when I ever tried to mention to like a friend or something that like, man, like I felt confused about my mission, right? Like I felt like people would get offended when I said that my mission wasn't that great, or like that I would take it back if I could, you know?
Yeah.
But I think they just, right, when people think about their own missions, I really do think like if I was a white missionary, it would have been better. And even if I was still a woman, right? Because there's still things on my mission as like they just were not, missions were built for males, you know, they really were. And so it makes it really hard when you are subject to all male leadership, because they just literally don't have a grasp on it. And my physical health really did suffer. I on my mission started to have issues with now they call it polycystic ovarian syndrome, but at the time they didn't know what it was, so they just said I was in premenopause because I just would bleed. I was bleeding for 2.5 months.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so at the time I was like, great, now I can't have children. And there goes that value. Yeah.
So if you had to describe in one word what your state was when you got home from your mission, what would you say the word would be?
Broken. Yeah. Yeah.
That's not what they tell you is going to happen when you go on a mission.
Yeah. No, they don't. They definitely don't tell you how hard it's going to be. And I don't think people really would even understand. People didn't understand.
Yeah.
Right? How hard it would be for, like, I thank God that I didn't go over, like, out of the country, because I could only imagine how hit and miss that would be, you know?
I have to tell you, there are places in the United States that are worse than places outside of the United States.
Okay. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. Yeah.
There are a lot of people, I meet people in other countries and they're like, how do you survive?
Yeah.
Like with gun violence alone, they're just like, we don't have anything like that
Yeah.
ever. Like that. They're just like, are you safe?
Yeah.
Like, wait, I'm in America. And they're like, yeah, are you safe?
Yeah. And I guess my only other place, like my husband went to Russia, and
Yeah, okay.
that was not
Yeah.
great.
Right.
So I'm like,
That might be.
Yeah, I'm like, I could have gone
I mean, yeah, there are worse.
to Russia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to make sense to have this interview be in two parts.
Okay.
And so what I want to do for the final part of this part one is for you to take us through the point where you're really starting to question the truthfulness of the church. And it's like, whoa, maybe this isn't true. Maybe this isn't what I want to be. So where we've left off is you saying you felt broken.
Yeah.
Where did it go from there?
Yeah. So I got home and went and got a job. My parents ended up selling like our childhood home, and moving to North Ogden. So I moved to Orem with an old mission companion. And that is where I met my husband. And
Was he at UVU, BYU, just working?
he was at UVU, but we met in our singles ward. So our two best friends were dating each other at the time, and they introduced us to each other. Yeah, and I feel like we connected really quick, you know? Like by the time we met, I had only been in Orem like a couple months, but I had like dated everyone in the singles ward that I don't know, that I thought was attractive and available, right? And so by the time I met him, and it was weird because I felt like I would just never get married because I don't feel like I had met anyone who I felt attracted to, like, right? Like, and I didn't know obviously the difference between different types of attraction.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And so I just was kind of like, guess this is like as good as it gets, you know? And any guys that I had dated in high school, I kind of like contextualized it as like, well, they were like bad guys. Like they weren't like righteous. Like this is like just how like righteous men are, you know? Like they keep their hands to themselves and they, you know, I don't know. So it just wasn't, I kind of like, before I met him, kind of was like, well, I guess I'll just be single for a while. And it feels good not to have to think about marriage for a long while.
So are you kind of saying that your experience dating before you met your husband after your mission was kind of void of attraction?
Yeah.
Even different aspects of attraction? You were just...
Yeah, I just was like intellectually and physically not attracted to the men that were available and interested, right? Like,
Yeah.
I didn't want to talk about getting married or being a mom or
Yep.
those type of things, and like the expectations for me for our future. Like there just wasn't any great deep conversation, you know?
Yeah.
And I just wasn't physically like, this is like a really good looking guy. I would just be like, well, he's like righteous, you know?
Yeah.
And in my patriarchal blessing, it was like, at the time it said that like my husband would be of somebody of, what does it say? Like high church, hold a high position in the church is all it said. And so I was like, yeah, these guys that are all seem like righteous enough to do that are really boring. Like,
Yeah.
But your husband was different?
yeah. I mean, when we met, he was inactive. So maybe that was the draw right away. Yeah. So right from the start, it was completely different because I was like, why is he inactive? How do I get him active in the church again? Yeah. And it was instant, like, physical attraction and like the conversations we had, it didn't feel so boxed in to this idea of who he thinks I was, but like a genuine conversation of like wanting to know who I was, you know?
Yeah.
Instead of just this view of like, this is how all women are. This is like what all women want. It was like actually like a conversation, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so 2 weeks into knowing each other, we started sleeping together.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, but you had said on your mission, I'm never leaving the church. That's, I mean, in Mormonism, that's the sin next to murder.
Yeah.
So how are you, and you knew that, and you had done all this atoning on your mission to atone, and I'm saying atone in air quotes for those who are just listening and not viewing. You had atoned for all that, quote, bad behavior before your mission. Now you're not only jumping right back into it, but you're actually having sex.
Yeah.
How was that for you with God, with your, you know, spirituality, with your sense of self-worth?
It was like devastating, and like I had done something, I had gone back and created a bigger mistake now.
Backslid, right?
Yeah. And then also it was so easy with him, right? Like it was so, like, I don't know how to explain it. Like this was my person, and I also didn't feel bad because it was so, I think like any experience that most people would want, right? Like it was like,
Yeah.
so beautiful, you know? Like I don't know how to explain it.
It was a loving, connected partner.
I was going to say, you've gone through recently an experience where you were so isolated in many ways.
Yeah.
You know, went through, like, was there an aspect of it that was healing? To connect with another person and to feel seen and to have your experiences feel seen?
Yeah. I think like that was probably huge. Like we were both hurting. Like for him, he had also had a very hard mission experience. And that was like why he was inactive. So like my husband also didn't serve a mission until he was 21, just because he didn't want to go yet. Like, so he decided to wait. And so it was like we could have conversations around that and not feel like the other one, like you were doing something like bad, right? Like
You were going off script from
Yeah.
the Truman Show.
exactly
kind of.
like it was like this was the person who could like finally understand and like not and like recognize that like those things were hard, you know, like and not just pretend like it was all okay, and could admit to like I feel like at that time I didn't admit to feeling like mistreated, right? Or
By
by like my mission president or
the church or the
church
culture.
or anything, you know. I wasn't willing to admit that, and I don't know if my husband was either. Like at the time we were still very much like, yeah, like that's just how it is, you know. And
Now, is he, I asked this for the understanding of the context. Is he white? Is he a person of color?
yeah, so he's half black.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what was just briefly, his background?
So his mom was a single mom her whole life. His whole life, she had met his dad, and similarly, just like a one night stand. She was very Mormon. She also had served a mission back when that was like unheard of for women to even go on a mission.
Well, she was white.
Yeah, she was white.
Yeah.
And so she never married his dad. He didn't really see his dad that much growing up. He just wasn't around to visit. He was a very laid back Jamaican man. Yeah, and so his mom was going to place him for adoption, but decided to not place him for adoption. So, yeah. So she raised him as a single mom.
And probably few people are going to really care about this, but just out of a coincidence, your husband's mom is former Utah Governor Gary Herbert's sister, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's why your last name's Herbert.
Yeah, exactly.
So Governor Gary Herbert is your dad's uncle, your husband's uncle, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
That
Got
is
it.
his
Got
uncle.
it.
Yeah.
Okay. So he was raised Mormon-ish, but served his mission late.
Yeah. So he's definitely raised Mormon.
Okay.
I think like a lot of times when people, I don't know, like I feel like he was raised Mormon, but like in his mom's family, he has family members who have had addiction, right? And even Gary, right, was from his mom's first marriage, right? So like my husband's mom's mom, like his grandma, got divorced at a time when it was like crazy to get divorced, you know?
Yeah.
So they kind of have always just been very much, even though they're Mormon, very much their own people doing things that they feel like they have to do, you know, like sticking to. I feel like my husband is very much like, I don't know, just so I would have never like been able to be like, no, I just don't want to go on a mission yet. You know, like
They did it their own way.
yes,
Yeah.
their own way.
So y'all were married how soon after you kind of fell in love?
A year later. Yeah.
And was it temple marriage?
No, it was not.
Okay. Was that for you a disappointment, a bad thing, a good thing?
A bad thing. Yeah.
Okay.
A very bad thing. Because we would go like immediately after and confess to
After
the bishop.
sex?
Yeah.
Okay. Confess to?
The bishop.
Okay.
And so this
Of
was
your singles word?
yeah.
Okay.
This was the first time I like had experienced this aspect of it.
I call it the shame parade.
Yeah, because at first I really didn't feel like there was part of me that was like, I don't feel bad because like this is like my person.
It's love.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's developmentally healthy and
And the
normal.
experience of it. If your experience of it is like, oh, like you've described.
Exactly. Yeah. And it was safe and it was so great, you know? And so I didn't feel bad until I went to confess. And I felt like I have to confess because it's like the right thing to do, you know? But at this point, because we had both gone through the temple and served missions, it was like just intense. Like threatened to like for my husband to be disfellowshipped. Luckily, I'm a woman, so I didn't get the same threatening. Like he was saying that my husband would need to have a disciplinary council.
Yeah.
And just like that, we couldn't take the sacrament. My husband felt so ashamed. He like wouldn't even wear his garments, didn't feel like worthy to wear his garments. I had no other underwear, so I still wore mine.
This is so hard.
Yeah.
This is hard, especially, you know, with the context of what you've both just kind of been through.
Yeah. No, it was so hard. Like, yeah, I really felt like I don't know. It was like before I had always felt like, yeah, like maybe I'm a whore and maybe I'm okay. Like, that's fine. You know, this was like, no, you are like scum. Like, this is like disgusting that you would do this, you know? It just felt a lot heavier than maybe when I was a teenager. And it felt even weirder because it also was like, this is the only person I've slept with. And not only that, this is the only person I want to sleep with. Like, I'm not even like saying that I'm, like, we want to get married, you know? And so then you have that discussion of, well, you can either stop sleeping together for a year or get married civilly. And then in a year, you can get married in the temple. And that was so hard to like tell my parents. I ended up going to a different singles ward because I moved areas at the time. And that singles ward bishop was way nicer, but it was also awkward because he knew who my parents were. I grew up with his daughter. We were friends. But I feel like he did the best he could. Like, he just said that, what did he say? Oh, he's like, well, he's like, you would have felt guilty either way, though, if you, right? He's like, I don't even know what he said. He was like, you would have felt guilty on your wedding night still. Like, he's like, we can't keep doing this, like, in the church where we make kids feel guilty for like normal behavior, you know? He's like, because you would have felt this way on your wedding night and done it the right way, you know? And so he was like, you should talk to your parents. If your parents are upset or disown you or whatever, he's like, that's on them, not on you. Yeah. And then he talked to the other singles ward bishop so that my husband didn't have to have a disciplinary council. Yeah. So it was a lot.
They take something so healthy. It's like this could have been the most amazing, wonderful experience of finding your true love, finding someone safe, having healthy consensual sex, building bonds, something just otherwise like a dream. And then there's this whole layer of shame and guilt and feeling worthless, you know, that they lay on top of it.
And stress and feeling like you're going to disappoint your parents. And then then you've got the public part of that where then
the shame.
Everyone knows and make assumptions. So.
Yeah, because if you send out the wedding announcements and it's not in the temple, everybody, what do Mormons draw as a conclusion from that?
Yeah, you obviously slept together. Yeah, I think that was like probably the hardest part of it was like everyone knowing. And even like at the time, like, oh my gosh, it was just so awkward. Like, and it didn't have to be like at the time I was 21 years old. Like, I'm an adult and it's like I moved into my brother's basement and they have a conversation with me about not bringing my then husband, who was my boyfriend, over. Like, we can't sleep together there. It's just like awkward.
Yeah.
Like, that's so weird to be like, I don't know. I just think nobody else would care. Like, if you're living in their basement apartment and have a boyfriend.
Right.
And to like have a conversation like that.
That's right.
Was just so uncomfortable for me. So it felt like the only time I was talked to about sex was in a shame, like it was shame based, you know?
Yeah.
Like, my parents had never talked to me about sex before, right? And now it's just like to tell me that you guys can't have sex.
The rule.
Yeah, the rule.
That's right.
So yeah, we did the whole...
And even as a 21-year-old, you're still living in a very parent-child, like you're 21.
Yeah.
So, but there's like no independent world for you or a recognition kind of that you're older.
Yeah.
And even that some things can be private. You can choose as you
you're
get
right.
older to keep things just for you that your parent doesn't, let's just say, have to know. Or
Let alone
bishop.
the entire community.
Or
Yeah,
bishop, or the
that's so
entire
true.
community. So it's like it puts you back in like a very young role
Childish.
of like,
Yeah.
now here's what we're going to have to do about that now. Yeah.
That's exactly, I felt like just caught between two worlds, because technically I still had just gotten back from my mission and still needed my parents' help to like
Still dependent.
get back on my feet, right? Like the jobs we're working are minimum wage jobs, so your parents are still helping you out with rent or gas money or whatever. So they still have like, I guess in Mormonism, they feel like they still have a say. And it's not always free, the money that they give you, right?
Yeah.
It comes with stipulations.
Yeah. But so you got civilly married.
Yes.
You made it through the shame parade.
Yes. We got married at the governor's mansion.
Yeah, I was going to say, so was Gary Herbert governor at the time?
Yeah, he was.
So you were married at the governor's mansion while your husband's uncle was governor,
Yes.
having walked through the Mormon sex shame parade.
Yeah. And my husband was living at the governor's mansion at the time because he was going to school at the U. So he lived there for a little bit.
Yeah.
But Gary was great. Like I feel like everyone was really great, like at least in our family wise. Like when my husband's mom found out that we were sleeping together was very awkward. She walked in the morning after into his bedroom. And I, was asleep, not clothed, under blankets. So it was very...
Hi there.
Yeah.
Morning to you.
Very awkward. And then my husband and her, I could hear them arguing upstairs. Because she was like, "You've ruined her life." Like, and maybe some of that was a little bit projection of her past situation,
Her vulnerability.
Yeah. But she's very devastated. And I'm shocked. Like, I'm always shocked that my husband, like, could, like, bravely just, like, stand his ground. Because I would have just avoided the conversation and gone to work and never spoke of it. And that's what I've done. We've never spoken of it with my mother-in-law.
With your mother-in-law about that time? Oh,
No.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Because I feel like I'm just like, this is so awkward. But, we still, I feel like Gary was nice to let us get married there. And he was very nice of not making us feel, everyone was very nice of not making us feel ashamed, right? And like, was just like, yeah, it happens. So... And he even gave us, the day we got married, he like dedicated it as like a national, it was like a Utah something day. I don't know. So that was also nice. I feel like they like went out of their way to make it very, very nice. You know?
Nice.
Yeah. Honor your love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
As you're talking, I'm like, it's a wonder we can sexually heal from these things because you're just all the things around your sexual identity, your sexual exploit. It's a doozy.
Yeah. It's crazy that so crazy.
It's a wonder. It's a wonder.
Yeah. And it's like weird too, because it's like I literally didn't even talk to my parents about sex. Like even after my husband and I were still sleeping together, it would have been nice to like know a little bit more how things worked, because we still were just like figuring it out on our own, you know?
YouTubing
it. Seriously. Except we didn't feel comfortable Googling it, because that would be pornography to Google anything.
To be clear.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So you got married. Did you get sealed in the temple?
Yes. So we got sealed a year later.
Okay.
And I got pregnant 3 months after we got married.
Okay.
So it was very quick. We got sealed with our baby, our firstborn, in the temple.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
And what year was that you were sealed in the temple?
Sweet.
2017, I want to say. Yeah.
Okay. So about 7 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this feels like a natural place to sort of end part one.
Yeah.
Because you made it to the Mormon finish line of temple marriage,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Which is what we hear about in Young Women's.
That's what they say is the single most important decision you'll ever make is who you marry and where you marry, right?
Yeah. I got one of them right. The first time, the who, not the where. Until
No, but you made it. You finally made it to the temple.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You were going to say?
Yeah. No, I was going to say, I feel like in Young Women's, this is kind of, for the Young Women's, this is kind of where you kind of hear about the temple, and it's all about the temple and all the things. I think there's some language around mothering, but like Relief Society sort of picks up kind of that rope. So anyway.
Yeah. Okay. And so that's where we'll end part one is with your temple marriage. And what we'll do is we'll take a little break and decide when to come back to hear about part two, which will be about where your church journey took you after your temple marriage and, starting to have kids and where that's took you now, kind of your Mormon journey post-temple marrich.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
Is there still more story to go?
Oh, there's so much more to go.
This has been really valuable, really powerful for me, and I know for Margie. So thank you for what you've been willing to share.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I've done 1,800 hours of this, and this has been really informative and enlightening and powerful. So
thanks. No, thank you for having me.
yeah. All right. Well, thanks for joining us for part one of Tara Herbert's story. And Margie, thanks for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah. And if you can, subscribe to us on YouTube, like us, same with Facebook or TikTok or Instagram, wherever you are. And then also, just really quickly, we depend on your financial support to be able to do these podcasts. So if you're in a position to be able to support us, you can do that at mormonstories.org by becoming a monthly donor. Click on the donate button. Otherwise, we're super excited for part two. So don't go away. Come right back. And we're going to hear about the Tara Herbert story part two. Thanks, everybody.